1 minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming to you live from across the divided states of America, the most disruptive show in those states and around the world, covering politics, news, events, and more. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a good morning. All of you, giving you a quick update on the show structure. In our first hour, 7:30 to 8, we're going to be talking with Ted Rall about the politics of the minimum wage increase, also taking calls. During our middle hour, we have two different guests, both on foreign policy topics, talking about what's going on in the UK, what's going on in Germany, and specifically in the UK, an unpaid arms debt to the Iranian regime, likely a significant factor in the imprisonment of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. Also talking about the Green Party likely to take power after Merkel. After that, we're talking with Sham Sharma at 8:45 about India threatening jail for Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter. And then in our 9 o'clock hour, we're going to be speaking with Howie Hawkins from the Green Party about the effects on third parties from HR 1. That is your brief preview of today's show. Getting into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, President Joe Biden's relief bill aimed at helping Americans deal with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic was approved by the Senate on Saturday. The bill received too much pushback from Republicans who say the plan is too costly. GOP Senator John Barrasso slammed Biden for pushing his $1.9 trillion stimulus package through Congress despite pledging to work with Republicans. In a statement from Barrasso, he claims, quote, when people find out what's in this bill, they're going to lose a lot of any enthusiasm they may have for it right now, end quote, quote, because this was not really about coronavirus in terms of the spending. This was a liberal wish list of liberal spending just basically filled with pork. It didn't need to be this way, end quote. $1.9 trillion plan allocates $350 billion to state and local governments and some $130 billion to schools. It also provides $49 billion for expanded COVID-19 testing and research, as well as $14 billion for vaccine distribution. Jamarl, what do you think? Do you think this was a liberal wish list of liberal spending just basically filled with pork, quote unquote? Or what's your take?
I think 500,000 people have dropped dead. I think they went up in flames. I think those 500,000 people went up in flames as a result of United States malfeasance. I think before any of that took place, meaning before those 500,000 people went up in flames, 42% were making a poverty wage. And honestly, the number was higher. You can even say 50% or more based on the number, meaning the number is so low for the poverty wage that it's almost like it's an artificial number in regards to what people actually need to make it ends meet. No, this wasn't a wish list. This was the American public had been abandoned for decades. And honestly, this bill should have been a floor, not a ceiling, if we're being bluntly honest. I mean, for God's sake, if this bill and the goal of this bill is to get America back up to speed, up and running, well, going back to that 42% making $18,000 a year, is not necessarily something I would say is great. If anything, that's taken us back to a decaying norm, which is not necessarily something that I think we all that much want. No, this is not a wish list. It's something that should have been there prior, honestly. I mean, the $300 child credit is phenomenal. I mean, that basically makes the argument for Social Security, or the Social Security argument makes the argument for ensuring that people's kids are intact. No, I think this is fine. I mean, there should be more. I think the 1.9 trillion is too little. I think $15 an hour minimum wage should have, if nothing else, been included into that bill. We were talking about that in the monologue. But a wish list? No. No. I would say it's necessary, if I'm being honest.
Alrighty. I hear you.
I mean, what do you think? How do you see it? I mean, do you see it as, I mean, because to get to the notion that it's a wish list ignores this notion that the country is experiencing pain. That's how I see it. Meaning, is it a wish list, or is it something that the country needs to get on some level of a stable footing? And is the objective to get the country onto a stable footing, and does this do it? I would say no, it doesn't get us to where we need to be. Is it better to where we were? I don't even know if it gets us back to where we were, considering all of the businesses that were lost, the people that died, the number of people that were ill, and everything else. And again, if you put this in context of the Great Depression, then how does this 1.9 trillion look? It looks far smaller than the impression that these guys are giving it. So no, I don't think it's a wish list.
It does. It looks significantly smaller. And so, if that's the frame you're going to use, although of course many Republicans would push back on their framing because of course many Republicans don't like FDR all that much. I'm going to take the independent perspective, which is I could and I do often voice my opinions about this stuff. But if I take a step back and look at it, I think each side can be right in their own way. I think that, and you're like, okay, Shane, that's a cop out. But seriously, on the one hand, I get what you're saying. Americans have been ignored substantially for a long time, and stuff like this is a long time in the coming. On the other hand, you listen to Republicans, and this is not a direct response to COVID. In some ways it is, but in a larger sense, it's an attempt to provide economic relief to Americans due to COVID and in general. As you were just saying, Americans have been ignored for decades. And so even in that messaging, there's something about, extra COVID. There's something about a general picture of the American situation. Now, am I saying that's a bad thing? No. But, once you get to that point, it's all flavor differences between whether you approve of the policies, the policies that are being, that are in this bill, or whether you disapprove of them. And clearly Republicans are going to disagree with them. But that's my attempt at an independent analysis of this. At least, I'm moving on to the next headline here, because we will be coming back to this for sure, both in your monologue and then with our interview with Ted Rall later on this hour. At least 682 new coronavirus deaths and 40,336 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 58,745 cases per day. That's a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 29,034,100 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 524,500 have died from it. In national political news, location, cellular, and call record data revealed a call tying a Proud Boys member to the Trump White House. The FBI has not determined what they discussed, and law enforcement officials would not reveal the names of either party. The same data has revealed no evidence of communications between the rioters and members of Congress during the January 6th attack on Congress, which goes against the allegations that some Republican lawmakers were active participants during the attack. Right-wing extremists, including members of the Oath Keepers, a militia group, have been working as security guards for Republicans and for Trump's allies, such as Roger Stone Jr. The Justice Department is looking into communications between Stone and far-right extremists to determine whether he played any role in the plans to disrupt the certification on January 6th. It was reported that former President Trump was scheduled to visit his hometown of New York on Sunday. What do you think, Jamarl? Do you think that Roger Stone was part of aiding and abetting this whole process?
I got to be honest, I don't know. I get the feeling that Roger Stone, these guys are all over the place. And, I mean, look, how did he get himself involved in the WikiLeaks stuff? I mean, he basically went to jail over getting himself involved in stuff. So, I don't know.
Lee kind of got him involved in that. Like, the previous host of the show has talked about it. how he basically set Roger Stone up with or talking to Guccifer. But the thing is, Guccifer 2.0, I mean, it was one of these back in the day. Guccifer 2.0 basically was the public anonymous face that was releasing what he said were leaks from the DNC. And it's a whole confusing situation because he's named after Guccifer 1.0, completely different person who does have an identity, who we do know exists as a specific person. Anyway, it's more confusing because you don't know who Guccifer 2.0 is. But Lee set Roger Stone up with that. Now, at the same time, a lot of other prominent media figures were also talking to Guccifer 2.0 publicly because he was talking to people. He was leaking stuff. You could go back and forth with him in Twitter DMs. And so people across the board were speaking with him. What makes it weird, and why I see this as a kangaroo court against Roger, at least in this specific case, people can dislike Roger for whatever reasons they want to, I don't care, but is that everybody was talking to him. And so the fact that Roger Stone, while he was acting in his capacity, while he was working with the Trump campaign, whatever, with the Trump White House eventually, what was he doing? Talking to this guy? A lot of people were doing that at the same time. It's not, I don't know. What's your take, Jamarl?
Yeah, that's just it. I don't know. I mean, like, it's possible. But like you said, your dad got him involved in that, and he ends up getting involved in it, drags Randy Critical in it, and he ends up getting prosecuted for it. And so it's like, is it possible that he got himself involved in something else? Maybe. I mean, this is one of those things where it's kind of a wait to see. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, if I don't think that he should have been charged for the first one, it seems. I mean, here's
No, I don't think he
guess
should have been
though, why
charged
they
for the
keep
first one.
bringing
It was
Roger
BS.
Stone up. Yeah, so then why are they? It's just they're trying to drag not just his name through the mud because he's just a tool in this. They're also trying to, of course, continue to use whatever they can against anybody linked to Trump
Right.
to associate them with it. But here's the thing: after Trump was impeached for a second time for personally, advocating for the March on Congress, even though we wanted people to do it peacefully, and I know you and I go back and forth on this one, on the impeachability of his quote-unquote crimes, whatever those are. Anyway, I think that maybe one of the reasons they keep bringing Roger Stone up here, I know we're rambling a bit, or I am specifically, is Roger Stone, big Nixon fan. And so you're like tying at the root the idea of Nixon, who, famous, of course, Watergate, famously left the presidency under pretty harsh circumstances. Maybe just tying the idea of Nixon to Trump is satisfying for Democrats because, of course, they wanted him to do the same for so long. Anyway, back to the headlines here. The Biden administration will transform 2 Texas facilities where detained migrant families are being held into rapid processing centers, meaning adults and children who cross the border will be housed for a maximum of 72 hours before being released. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement that's ICE, said families will be detained at a 2,400-bed detention center in Karnes City and an 839-bed detention center in Dilley, Texas, for 3 days or less. Migrant families previously held at a third facility, the 96-bed Berks County Family Detention Center in Leesport, Pennsylvania, have all been released. That detention center will reportedly be used by ICE to hold adults now. Thomas Homan, the former acting director of ICE under the Trump administration, argued Biden's team created a crisis at the border in quote-unquote record time by ending accomplishments made by the Trump administration within the first 40 days since Inauguration Day. Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo reiterated on Sunday that he had no plans to resign, despite the fact that 2 more accusers have come forward over the weekend, taking the total number of accusers to 5. These are sexual harassment allegations coming out against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Karen Hinton and Anna Liss, who once served as an aide to the governor, both came forward with their own stories to tell of Cuomo's inappropriate behavior in the past. This is after last week his second accuser, Charlotte Bennett, basically put out the word, hey, come forward. If you come forward, we will stand with you. Now there are 5. Where there was 1, now there are 5. In an over-the-phone press conference, Cuomo stated, "There is no way I resign." I'm quoting here, "Let's do the Attorney General investigation. Let's do the findings, and then we go from there. But I'm not going to be distracted by this either," end quote. Really? You're not going to be distracted by this? Way to frame it. 2 Democratic leaders in New York State House, State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and House Speaker Carl E. Heastie, have called on Cuomo to resign amid these allegations. In international news, Boris Johnson has requested for Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman jailed in Iran on spying charges, to be released permanently so that she can be reunited with her family in the UK. Zaghari-Ratcliffe had been out of prison since last spring due to the coronavirus pandemic, but was confined to house arrest at her parents' home. Her sentence was due to end on Sunday. She was arrested in April 2016 while traveling to visit her parents in Iran. She was sentenced in She has not yet had her British passport returned to her. Her family and the UK government have maintained her innocence, and she has been given diplomatic protection by the Foreign Office, meaning that the case is treated as a formal legal dispute between Britain and Iran. And we've got to close it here. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines. We will be back in a minute with our soapbox segment, Jamarl's monologue, and a short back and forth on that topic. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak: The Deadliest Epidemics in Human History, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. You can also join in on the conversation with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. The Senate has passed the $1.9 trillion stimulus over the weekend. $1,400 stimulus checks, $300 a week jobless benefits, child allowance up to $3,600, to $350 billion to state and local aid, $34 billion for ACA subsidies, $14 billion for vaccine distribution, 100% COBRA subsidies. Those are basically giveaways to the health insurance companies. Instead of having something like Medicare for all, you're going to basically give a ton of money to leeches in our system. So, woohoo! The Democrats did it. $1.9 trillion passed the Senate. Or did they do it? You can clearly hear by my voice that I am not satisfied or even happy with this. I'd show the sad spectacle of Chuck Schumer trying to work himself up to celebrate alone at the press podium. But honestly, it's too pathetic to show. Stimulus checks were ripped from 17 million people. It wasn't 2,000. It was 1,400. The 2,000 was promised. They want you to do math. About $600 supposedly from Donald Trump. And they also missed the point that this was supposed to be sent to everybody, not between people making 70 to 80,000. You didn't keep your promise. And arguably, the biggest piece of the bill was missing. $15 an hour minimum wage. That is a big deal. That is a massive deal. That is something where the Democratic Party can say, look at what we did. This is something that hits the working class directly. A working class that was making 42%, where half of the public was in poverty. This is the thing that would have been in one of Joe Biden's legacies. This is the thing that the president promised he was going to do. This is the thing that candidate Joe Biden promised he was going to do. And this was the thing that wasn't in the bill. Here's the catch, and this is what happened. The bill comes from the House. the House has the $15 an hour minimum wage in it. It goes to the Senate. Joe Manchin, Cena, and a few other Democrats vote against it. They don't want it. And so it's not included. Sanders tries to add the amendment in which Cena, Manchin, and some of the other ones vote against it. That didn't stop Manchin and Tester from adding in, the oil pipeline issue into the bill, trying to get the oil extraction thing in. But $15 an hour minimum wage? No, you can't have the minimum wage. The American worker doesn't deserve an increase in the minimum wage. The catch here is, just because they took it out doesn't mean that the House can't put it back in. The parliamentarian overrode the House or the Senate in saying that budget reconciliation could be used for the $15 an hour minimum wage. The truth is, Kamala Harris can overrule the parliamentarian. It's a fake wall. Joe Biden and the Democratic Party could get rid of the filibuster, the thing that will basically stop them from doing this later on. Here we are, again, another false wall. The president said this is what we're going to do, and yet the president doesn't seem to all that much be engaged in ensuring that the $15 an hour minimum wage goes through, that he keeps his campaign promise. The president doesn't seem to all that much care. It goes back to the House. What is the House going to do? Is the House going to take out the $15 an hour minimum wage in order to make the bill go through and pass? Or are they going to put it back in? And are they going to hold the line saying this bill is not going to pass without the $15 an hour minimum wage, and send it back to the Senate and give it to Joe Manchin to kill it and let him kill it? You draw a line in the sand. The question is, what is the House going to do? There is one chance to pass $15 an hour minimum wage. It is either by killing the filibuster or it's through budget reconciliation. You're not going to kill the filibuster, so we're back to budget reconciliation. If you kill it here, you never get it. Meaning if the $15 an hour minimum wage thing dies here, you will never get it. There is no other capacity that you're going to be able to get this in Joe Biden's first term. And honestly, you're blowing your chances of winning and maintaining the House and the Senate in the midterms with behavior just like this. There are times where you're stuck working between the lines, and there are other times where your job, your objective is to burn down the line factory and basically implement and manifest your will. This is one of those times for the House. This is one of those times for whatever it means to be the left in politics. To act, to accentuate themselves. The left has an opportunity to vigorously encourage the president to do what he promised America. Will they take the opportunity? Millions of Americans drag themselves to the polls expecting the left, or expecting, especially on the left, fighting cynicism to pull the lever for one Joe Biden, believing that he was going to do something big, FDR-like, that he was going to pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. Don't get me wrong. Biden is going to try to come up with the political excuses of, the parliamentarian, the Republicans, and all this other stuff. But this is different. The left has an opportunity to hold him to account. Does the left exist in Congress if they're never willing to use their power in moments like this? At the very least, the equal measure is one Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin had no issue using his power to say, yes, I'm going to kill this bill if this bill increases the minimum wage for workers. He had no issue with that at all. So why should the left have any issue doing the exact same thing when they send the bill back saying, the president promised this, we told him we're going to deliver this, it's up to you to kill this? Joe Biden, whether he wants to pretend to or not, is not the weakest man on the planet. Joe Biden is not the weakest man in the world. If Joe Manchin believes that this bill is unacceptable with the $15 an hour minimum wage in the bill, then there's nothing wrong with the left taking the purview that it is entirely wrong to pass this bill without the $15 minimum wage in it, and turn to the president and say, well, the president says he wants it in the bill, whether the left believes that the president wants it in the bill or not. Challenge the president's credibility on this front. Republicans do it. Well, the president say he's going to be bipartisan. Do they really believe it? No. Do they use it for the politics because the president said it and it would tear his credibility? Yes. I'm saying you should do the same thing. Send it back to the Senate. Let Joe Manchin make the argument about why the working class isn't deserving of an increase in regards to the minimum wage. And let Manchin have the responsibility of voting the bill down. Better yet, let the weakest man on the planet that just so happens to be the president of the United States stand by as this key policy go up in smoke. And I don't mean the $15 an hour minimum wage. I mean the COVID stimulus bill itself. It's politics. What do you think it is? This is a line in the sand moment for the House, especially from the standpoint of the left, to stand up for America and to force the president to either repudiate his own objective of a $15 an hour minimum wage to get basically a stimulus passed, or to expend some level of political capital to get the likes of Joe Manchin on board. What do you want to do, Joe Biden? Have the bill go up in smoke, or get your people on board? Biden should be presented with no other alternatives by the House other than to use his agency as president to choose. Understand what I'm saying? If Joe Biden really wants this COVID bill passed, fair enough. Does Joe Biden believe in a $15 an hour minimum wage or not? I don't believe he does, personally. But whether he does or not is almost irrelevant from the standpoint of the House. If the House really honestly does believe in the $15, and by the way, you don't even need the entirety of the House. I don't care if the House started this off with the optics and theater of the $15 an hour minimum wage. They put it in the bill the first time around. The president said that he wanted it. The left, whatever considers itself to be the left, has all the power in the world to say we are not going to vote for this without the president's $15 an hour minimum wage, and to consistently invoke Joe Biden as wanting it, as you say, this needs to be in the bill. Make your arguments, make your case, but definitely invoke Joe Biden and force Joe Biden to either choose, kill it by working with Manchin, repudiate your own policy, or back it. Joe Biden should not get any other alternatives, meaning the left, or what, if such exists. Right now, this is a force the vote moment. This is not forcing the vote for a vanity thing on Medicare for all. This is a forcing the vote to increase the minimum wage, doubling it, a direct input to the American public, something where the American public to see that you worked for their interests and you didn't let this go by without doing this for their interests. The question is for the left. The question is for the House. Shane, what do you think they're going to choose? You think they're going to force the president to use the agency that is at his discretion? Or you think the House is going to pass that bill without the $15 an hour minimum wage in it? Which one do you think is going to happen?
The second. But I mean, the merry-go-round keeps going round. Because you're talking about the House pressuring the president, you're talking about the president pressuring Congress. Where does the buck stop exactly? I guess what you're saying is the buck could stop on either end, and they could push the other to act. But
yes,
wouldn't? But here's the thing: two sort of contradictory points that cut into each other a little bit. On the one hand, you and many of our guests have said the $15 minimum wage is not nearly enough. If you were actually to look at how wages should have increased over time, it would be closer to double that, if not higher. On the other hand, you're talking about playing hardball politics and pushing to basically prevent the rollout of this bill until they get more concessions from Republicans on these key issues. But which is it? Would that be hardball politics, or because this is a middling gain compared to what you could be pushing for, is it pushing for sort of the bare minimum from your perspective and trying to get that through? Would it be realistic to push for more than that, or on the contrary, is the whole thing a waste of people's time? And you're trying, not you, but it would be dragging, a lot of people who are waiting on any relief, be dragging them through the mud in order to get some middling gain that's a bit more than that, which could be treated as an independent political process and passed on its own merit or not. I mean, there are all these different ways this can go. Clearly, you're thinking of this in terms of chess, and I get it. But politically, the trend that I notice is that Democrats over time, if they were to follow that policy, could be justly accused of holding people back from getting exactly the same kinds of checks that, they've been promising to give them for months now, in the name of getting something that isn't even that revolutionary to begin with. What's your take?
You don't think that doubling the minimum wage is revolutionary? I could show you the old debates where Ted Kennedy was trying to get $2 an hour minimum wage and they wouldn't let him do it. And also,
is that revolutionary?
What do you mean, the $2?
Exactly.
$2 weren't revolutionary, but I guess I'm making the point to you that if Ted Kennedy had difficulty getting $2 an hour over the finish line, and these guys are trying to double the minimum wage, yes, that's a big deal. That's a significant deal, especially if you're making $7 an hour, meaning if you're on the federal minimum wage. Or hell, if you're making $10 an hour, that's a big deal. That is a big deal. Now, the catch becomes whether or not it keeps up with the minimum wage and everything else. Look, $15 an hour, meaning fight for 15, is something that seeded the population. It's something the population gets. It's something it knows. It's something people have been fighting for. It's something that was in the public consciousness. To turn around and then say, okay, now we're going to do for 20. Nobody has a context of that. They do have a context of 15. And so the House, at this point, has power, period. And you don't even need the entirety of the House. You're talking about 10 members of Congress. I don't even know if you need that much to basically say we're not going to do it without the 15. I don't see how this is any different than Joe Manchin saying, I'm not going to do it with the 15. With one difference. The President of the United States and candidate Joe Biden screamed into a microphone over and over that he was going to do this. So, yeah, I do think the House should take the opportunity to say, all right, this is going to stay in the bill, accept it or not, and make Joe Manchin, and for that matter, Joe Biden, come up and say, I'm going to vote this bill down. I'm going to repudiate the policy that I told you I was going to back for all that time. Because at the end of the day, the only person who will be the deal breaker in that is Joe Biden. Make Joe Biden have agency. That's my point. Does that make sense?
It does to some extent, but here's what I'm saying. I would double it again, because then at least you can make the argument that you're keeping up with where the wages should be. You're directly responding to wage stagnation. And if you were to push for that, I'm just putting this out there, then all of a sudden you'd have to contend with the real reasons for why that wage stagnation has taken place. There are problems here, like deep fundamental problems, structural problems in the nature of our economy that we need to deal with if we want to get people's wages up, to where they should have been, where they should have been trending over the last 50 years. We would need to deal with those deeper problems if we were to push for something like that. And it's a simple argument to make. If you say to people, 50 years ago, people were making this much, these are where the trend lines are going, and people know it. You're not making nearly as much as you should be. It's a very simple argument to make. It responds to some of people's most basic preferences and biases and needs. I don't know. I think that could work too, but I get what you're saying.
So you're further to the left on me than this. You're like $30 an hour. Let's do it.
I don't, man. I could see history going all sorts of different ways. I'm saying that seems more logically consistent with the tenor of the argument that I hear from progressives than pushing for the middle ground on this. I'm not even saying I would advocate for that. I'd need to hear more specifics. What I want are the deeper structural reforms in our economy so that becomes not just a possibility, but an inevitability. And if this pushes us closer to that point where wages don't stagnate, they shouldn't have stagnated, where we can reverse that process, then all's good in my court. But it seems more consistent with the point, the progressive take on this stuff. Anyway, we need to go to a break. We'll be continuing this conversation on the other side of this break with Ted Rall, and at 7:45. In about 15 minutes, we're taking your calls, talking to you about how a higher minimum wage would affect your life. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we, on this channel, Fault Lines, have been quite correct on the Cuomo issue. We hit the issue weeks before the mainstream media got wind of it. We didn't necessarily fall for the clapping like lemmings at everything that Cuomo did. We got the story right when the other ones got it wrong. Cuomo's problems deepen over the weekend as Saturday found two more women to step forward accusing Governor Cuomo of inappropriate conduct, bringing the total 5. The Washington Post didn't help the governor's plight as speaking to 150 former and current staffers as they spoke to 150 current and former staffers, many of which described a toxic culture of humiliation, vicious verbal abuse, and casual misogyny. Among those contacted, most spoke on condition of anonymity, as they were still terrified that the disgraced governor had the power to reach out and destroy their careers. Despite that, Cuomo is pretty insistent that he is not resigning. He wants the investigation to go through and go forward, and he wants to stay in his role. Despite what Cuomo wants, you've had multiple calls at this point from the Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, Senate Majority Leader, right, and Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie. Now, Majority Leader Cousins basically made the point that he should resign. Heastie's wouldn't go to that point, but basically made the argument, quote, it's time for the governor to seriously consider whether he can effectively meet the needs of the people of New York, unquote. To have this conversation, we're joined by Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist, and also a resident of the same New York that we are talking about. Ted, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm good, gentlemen. How are you?
We are doing fine. So, Ted, what on earth is taking place in New York right now? I mean, because basically you have a governor that was rocked by multiple crises. I mean, in one case, you have all of these people that were apparently, let's just be honest. The decisions that Cuomo made got a lot of people killed in the nursing homes. And he hid the numbers because he didn't want to deal with the potential of a federal investigation, not to mention the local humiliation of Donald Trump tweeting at him and attacking him, I should say, national humiliation. And then you end up with people saying, well, the guy is also a brute. And on top of him being a brute, apparently can't keep his hands off of various women. Cuomo came out to apologize. Let's hear his apology. This is Cuomo trying to be contrite. This is awesome. Let's play the clip.
I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it. And that's not easy to say, but that's the truth. But this is what I want you to know, and I want you to know this from me directly. I never touched anyone inappropriately. I never touched anyone inappropriately.
He feels awful, Ted, and he's frankly embarrassed. And it sounds like even that he was at the brink of tears. What's your thought of that? Yes, I'm being brutal here. What's your thought of that, Ted? How do you frame that? And for that matter, how does New York take this? I mean, did they take that apology as being sincere? Is that enough level of contriteness? Are they going to give him a pass? What's the talk in New York right now over this? And not to mention, how do you personally see it?
Well, there's obviously going to be a bell curve of reaction to this. So there's going to be a lot of people who are willing to give him a pass. There's going to be other people who've been out to get him all along. And I think there's the top of the bell curve where there's a lot of discomfort and this sort of feeling like, can't someone rid us of this meddlesome governor and get us past this because it's such an embarrassment to the Democratic Party. Where I am, and I think this is sort of generally true for voters, is that whenever there's a big gap between self-promotion and reality, that creates a massive problem for a public figure. So when you present yourself as a pinnacle, an epitome of empathy and goodness, the way that Governor Cuomo did during his morning press briefings during the first 3 to 6 months of the COVID lockdown, and then it turns out that you were a handsy pig and who bullied all of your staffers behind the scenes, that's tough. If we found out that Donald Trump had been yelling at his staff behind the scenes, that wouldn't shock anyone. There wouldn't be any feeling of a massive chasm of hypocrisy. And similarly, if Cuomo, who created the reputation for himself as, in comparison with Donald Trump, here's the reasonable guy handling COVID. And it turns out that, much like the president himself, he was reckless and played fast and loose with people's lives and made some really inexplicable decisions that, as you pointed out, Jamarl, got people killed. When you see that gap that massive gap between your public image and the reality, and that falls apart, that's going to be, that creates an existential crisis for your political career. Listening to that, quote unquote, I'm going to say non-apology. I was really struck by the cadence of it. Really reminded me in tone and in delivery and even in its cadence to the Joe Biden non-apology about his handsiness that he made during the Democratic primaries last year. Even the Joe Biden tick of repeating the bold-faced quote twice, I did not. That's really interesting. It's almost like he cut and pasted it. And, I don't know if to me, there's no worse apology than, wow, I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm really sorry you thought I did.
Well, and maybe that could be very intentional on Cuomo's part, specifically the copy pasting that you're talking about, because after all, Biden has not faced all that much flack for the allegations that were made against him. Tara Reade, namely and specifically, and that includes from his own vice president, who, despite having said that she believes the accusers, choosing to serve under him as VP. So I could see Cuomo looking at this situation from this dude of a higher political stature, thinking, what did he do to get off the hook here? And, choosing to ape him on that process. He's also, here's another side of this, of course. It's not just the nursing home deaths. We've got three separate trains rolling here. You have a lawsuit. You have the FBI investigation. You have a legal process that Cuomo will be facing for at least many months at this point. You have the sexual harassment allegations, which are taking most of the headlines. And then you have the accusations of sort of brute force politics coming from, various people under him, including journalists, including Ron Kim, the assemblyman. And I'm sure, those stories will continue to grow too. These three trains are not going to stop rolling for a long time. That means that you're going to see a barrage, more headlines coming out, waves of these things for the coming months. And I don't see how Cuomo manages to weather this storm successfully. Now, I don't know I don't think any of us know what that's going to mean, but just pointing out these things have longevity. They will continue. He'll have to continue to face the repercussions of them and respond to them. And likely what that's going to see is him ratcheting up the level of apology that he's willing to engage in. So while in this apology, he said he didn't touch anybody, and he, profusely said that he was sorry for his insensitive remarks, or at least for how saying that that's how people took them and that he was sorry about that. He's going to have to move that line. He's going to have to move that goalpost a little bit, towards a more apologetic, sort of more serious accusation, responding to the more serious accusations being made against him. And as he continues to ratchet that up, that's going to increase the level of political response that he's going to get, and it's going to change how the public in New York views him. We've also got this clip. I'm sure you've seen this too, Ted, very likely at least. A bit of a longer clip, but it has to do with all of the accolades that people were giving Cuomo in the media last year relating to his response to the coronavirus. Now, again, arguably his biggest crime here, it's not the sexual harassment, it's not the brute force politics, it's the thousands of deaths, it's the grandmothers and grandfathers that he left to die. We've got this clip before we go into our break. Let's play this clip real quick. This is from last year. Go for it, Andre.
David, we're standing by for Governor Cuomo's press conference, his daily briefing. How would you contrast Cuomo and President Trump's handling of the crisis?
Truth versus mendacity.
Governor Cuomo out there day after day after day, everything Trump isn't, honest, direct, brave.
Real leadership of the kind the President of the United States should have provided.
Governor Cuomo is clearly living in a totally different reality, the actual one, than the President of the United States.
Governor Cuomo has become a national leader.
For a lot of people, Andrew Cuomo has become the leader of the Democratic Party.
He is conveying incredible strength.
You spoke to National Guard troops today in a stirring speech that, if I wasn't listening carefully, I thought you were sending soldiers off to war.
This has been a remarkable show of leadership by Governor Cuomo in recent days. He's providing hope, but not false hope.
Governor Cuomo, I think.
And there we go. I mean, you know what? This goes on for about twice as long. This goes on, that's, I don't know, 30 seconds of it or so. That's like there's another minute of it at least. It was just constant, and you can hear it, and the praise is profuse. Ted, before we go into our break, any quick comments on that? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's that big gap. I think there was talk of of Cuomo possibly being a candidate for president in the next cycle. I mean, that's gone. But I think he can survive, but he's going to have to keep his head down and hope for something else in the news cycle to wash this away.
That would be the strategy. I'm just not sure that's going to happen. But if he makes it, that's how he does it. You're absolutely right. You know what? We got to go into a break. We'll be back on the other side with our guest Ted Rall, talking the $15 minimum wage increase, the politics of the bill, and taking your calls on how a minimum wage increase would affect or would have affected your life in the past. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 202-521-1320 is the number. We'll be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. One of the conversations that we were having talking about was the $15 an hour minimum wage. And it was put into the bill in the House. Joe Biden said he was going to back it. And unfortunately, after the candidacy of Joe Biden, once he became president, that president, despite still saying he was going to back it, backed away from it very quickly when there was even a hint of opposition. The parliamentarian says, I don't think this should go into budget reconciliation. And despite Kamala Harris having the ability to override her, Kamala Harris doesn't. The Democratic Party has the ability to get rid of the filibuster and enact America's agenda. They don't get rid of the filibuster. And so then the question becomes, how are they going to enact $15 an hour minimum wage if they're not going to do it through budget reconciliation? And the answer is that they're not. If it's not going to be through this, it's not going to be at all. And Joe Biden has the ability to push the various members in the Senate that is against it to get on board. The House has the ability to force Joe Biden to use his agency as president to make a choice. And that's my pitch, that the House needs to stand behind the $15 an hour minimum wage, seeing as Joe Biden said that that's what he wanted as a candidate, seeing that's what he said he wanted as a president. And they need to make the president stand by his word. To join us, to have this particular conversation, and we're even going to bring in the audience to this, Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. If the audience wants to call in to have a conversation about how would a $15 minimum wage better your life or affect your life, you can do so. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Ted, what are your thoughts? Do you think that the House should push Biden on this issue? Because Biden right now is acting as if he's the weakest man in the world. Oh, I can't do anything about the House. I can't do anything about the parliamentarian. The Republicans aren't backing me on this. But the Democrats are negotiating with themselves. And they could put it in the House and force the Senate to kill that bill, which would mean Joe Biden will be stuck in the position of, do I back the House and keep in the 15, or do I back the Senate and taking it out? And that's where I am. I want Biden to make a choice. Let's stop leaving the president as if he has no agency in this. Make him make a choice. What are your thoughts, Ted?
Generally lead from behind, right? I mean, Obama only endorsed gay marriage after the whole country already endorsed gay marriage, and it was clear that it was going to the Supreme Court. There's I think, a fair point to be made in defense of the Democrats and Kamala Harris that it's unusual to overrule the Senate parliamentarian. But I take the broader point, and look, if Biden wanted this minimum wage increase to go through, and let's be clear, we're not talking about $15. We're talking about $15 scaled over the next 4 years. We're really talking about $9.50. From $7.25 to $9.50. That's what's on the table, and then slowly increasing. And if it passed, mark my words, when the Republicans win in the midterms, there would be, or when they take the presidency back, you can be sure there would be a move to stop the increase to 15 by the year 2025. So we're not talking about 15. That's not actually on the table. But if he wanted to do it, there's two ways. First of all, and nobody talks about this, there's a bully pulpit. When the President of the United States takes his case directly to the American people night after night on national television and pushes for a policy change that can and often does move the needle. Lots of presidents were really good at it. Reagan, FDR, other presidents have done it. Obama could be good at it when he wanted to, which wasn't often. But the thing is, and Biden could do that. He didn't talk about the minimum wage after the election. To me, that indicated that he had no intention of doing it. And of course, tying it to the stimulus bill indicated to me that he was never serious about pushing it. Then there's the behind the scenes tactics. He could threaten, as you said, to, the Democrats in the Congress, but also he could encourage this. He could say, okay, we're not going to have any stimulus at all unless we do this. But, you could also say, okay, I'm not going to approve any military spending, something that's very near and dear to the Republican Party. You could threaten to shut down the government. Republicans play hardball when they want a policy change, and they get what they want because they threaten to blow up the whole thing. Democrats could do the same thing if they were serious. They're not serious. So between the lack of effort on the propaganda front and the lack of effort behind the scenes, playing hardball, twisting elbows, it's clear they just aren't that into the minimum wage increase.
Yeah, I don't think they were. I never thought they were being honest and fair about the minimum wage thing. Now, to be fair, though, Biden did announce it when he became president. There was this big speech. He had Kamala Harris standing behind him. And he made the point about, like we spoke to our economic advisors, we need to pass the minimum wage, etc. But like you said, he was downing it almost immediately. Even talking to the governor saying, I don't think we could do it. I don't think we could do it. No, it wasn't true believer for it. And we have callers. Peter from New York. Peter, what's going on?
Hi, Jamal.
What's going on, Peter?
Hi, how are you doing? Hear me?
Yeah, we're doing fine, Peter. What's going on, Peter? What's going on?
Peter, what's going on? What's on your mind, man?
I wasn't hearing a response, so I didn't know if anyone was hearing me. I thought my headphones died out.
Please continue, Peter. What's going on?
I got kind of insulted by what you said earlier. When you said that Medicare for All was a vanity project, when it comes to forcing the vote, but $15 an hour isn't a vanity.
Do you believe that the force the vote was going to get Medicare for all?
No, I just believe that it shows who's actually willing to fight for it.
I know, but is it going to get Medicare for all?
That is one step to fighting, to getting it.
Is it going to get Medicare for all? Was forced to vote going to ever get you Medicare for all? I get that you would be able to say this person is for it, that person is not. But were you going to get the policy?
Would the forced to vote for the $15 an hour would have got it?
Yes. Yes. That's the difference. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Why would you even get offended by that? Why would you even get offended by that? I can see if you disagree, but offended?
How? It just got proven that the president that just got elected into office because everyone promised him their vote.
Okay, I don't know what that means. What I do know is $15 an hour is something that they can actually get him to pass. Medicare for all was not something they were ever going to get, even if they got the vote. That's my point. Let's go to Louise. Louise, what's going on? From Virginia.
Once again, Ted Rawls says it all. And I'm in with the quick suggestion that you also have Richard Wolff give his view on this, which is very good too, slightly more economics than Ted. All right, I always listen to Ted. As soon as I hear his voice, I rush to the radio. Thanks. Bye.
Louise, thanks for the call. That was it was an interesting exchange on the last caller on Peter there. I mean, Ted, what do you when it comes back to the Medicare for all, the force the vote conversation of Medicare for all versus this issue? What's your take? Do you agree with Jamarl? Do you agree with Peter? Where do you land on that one?
No, I agree with Jamarl. I mean, look, obviously, there was not, Washington's about results, right? So we're supposed to be, and this was obviously never going to work. It's a lot like the talk about getting rid of the filibuster. I mean, that's not going to happen. There aren't votes for the Democrats. Don't have the votes to do that. So when they talk about something like force the vote or get rid of the filibuster, it's just magical thinking. It's like you might as well say, well, if space aliens land in Oklahoma and give us all free medical care, then everything will be fine. Well, I suppose that's true. It's just that it's not going to happen. So why are we wasting our time talking about things that aren't going to happen while real ordinary Americans are going to the doctor every single day and aren't able to pay their bills? So this is ridiculous. As Bernie Sanders has said time and time again, every other country in the world that is of any means whatsoever, and I don't mean just highly advanced industrialized countries, but many in the developing world are able to handle this healthcare issue and make sure that all of their citizens can see a doctor without going bankrupt. Surely we could do this. It's not a lack of financial ability or the ability to get organized. It's not even a lack of political will. It's entrenched interests in the insurance industry in Hartford, Connecticut, that are pulling the strings behind the scenes and making sure we don't get what we need.
I hear you. I just want to briefly comment on this one too by bringing up aliens landing in Oklahoma pushing for Medicare. You have actually combined, I think accidentally, a couple of Jamarl's longest term fascinations and left.
It's funny. I was sitting here thinking, you don't know that, Ted. I was like, you don't know if those aliens will come and give us healthcare. I would push back on something. I don't think force the vote was a bad idea. I mean, I may be taking a shot at the caller because, the idea of getting offended because I disagree with the tactic is insane. But I do think there's value in clarifying who is actually for it versus not. Even though I don't have any belief at all that it was going to bring Medicare for all, if that makes sense. Like there were victories of it that went beyond just whether or not you could pass the bill. And so on that point, I did agree with. But I totally get your point on that one, Ted. So let me ask you this. Oh, we have Brave. Brave from ATL. Brave, I'm going to get to you now because I don't want to lose you. Sometimes we always miss you in these early calls. What's going on, man?
Hey, good morning, guys. I understand why the caller would be offended. I think we should all be offended, not because you took the shot. I understand why you're taking the shot at it, but I get it totally. I think that we should all be offended by the conversation, the premise of the conversation, the need to have this conversation in this way. And again, I'm not pointing at you guys specifically. It's just the idea that we're saying that force to vote was never going to happen, right? And that way it's a vanity project. I get the idea that, but here's the issue. none of this stuff is ever going to happen under that same thought process, because Biden, on the campaign trail, $15 an hour, $2,000 checks. As soon as you vote for Warnock and the other guy, then we're going to get you the next day or the next week, right? And then comes right back out and then says, I don't think the $15 an hour is going to pass. Speaking to the insiders, right? These guys never intended to do any of this stuff, and I don't think it's a matter of. Well, we know it's not a matter of Biden using his bully pulpit or the House wanting it and forcing it through. They don't want it. But Ted Rawl made the point earlier that when the Republicans go and
Brave. Oh God, man, I'm gonna have to cut you off. Please call back in. At the end of it, please call back. Because you're right. I mean, we shouldn't even have to have this conversation. Dude said he was going to push it. He should have pushed it. And I don't believe for a moment that he was believing in the $15 an hour minimum wage. Ted, thank you for joining us, man. Ted Rawl is political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rawl and read his cartoons and articles at rawl.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe, welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. Wow. At least 682 new coronavirus deaths and 40,336 new cases were reported in the United States on yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 58,745 cases per day, a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 29,034,100 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 524,500 have died. 682, I can't believe I'm saying this, but wow, that is a pretty decent number in comparison to the 5,000 people that were dropping dead a month or so ago. Yeah, very strange to say. President Joe Biden's relief bill aimed at helping Americans deal with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic was approved by the Senate on Saturday. The bill received much pushback from Republicans who said the plan is too costly. Nonsense. GOP Senator John Barrasso slammed Biden for pushing this $1.9 trillion stimulus package through Congress despite pledging to work with Republicans. In a statement from Barrasso, he claimed, quote, when people find out what's in this bill, they're going to lose a lot of enthusiasm they may have for it right now because this is not really about the coronavirus in terms of spending. This is a liberal wish list of liberal spending that just basically fill with pork. It didn't need to be this way, unquote. The $1.9 trillion plan allocates $350 billion to state and local governments and some $130 billion to schools. It also provides $49 billion for expanded COVID-19 testing and research, as well as $14 billion for vaccine distribution. It does not include the $15 an hour minimum wage, and it does not include $2,000 checks. And even the $14,000 checks that are being sent have been means tested to such a degree where millions of people no longer will be getting a check. So they can say that, yes, we made our promises, but did they? Did you really get $2,000 from Joe Biden? Or did Trump give you $600? I know Trump gave you $600 because Trump wrote his name on the check that he gave you. It is not this notion of $600 plus $1,400. Nobody gave you that math. They just said 2,000. The same thing with the $15 an hour minimum wage. Joe Biden went from pillar to post telling people, this is what I'm going to do. Even in the debates with Trump, gets into a fight with Trump over the notion of $15 an hour. And he says, this is what I'm going to do. This is what the American public needs. Nobody should go and live without the capacity to work and eat. And this is the least that people can live on. And then all of a sudden, he goes downing the plan to the various mayors or to the various governors, and in no way backs it, in no way pushes the various members in order to get that stuff passed. It's because he never believed it. He sold you a bill of goods. When people like me told you that Joe Biden was not being honest, that he has a history going in Congress for like 40-something years, and that this notion that he's going to be some kind of liberal icon after spending 40-something years not being that, it was farcical. Oh, right here. It was farcical. It was farcical. Now, the question becomes, what do the people in the House who call themselves progressives, is there something more to the Progressive Caucus than just the money that they have to spend to get the name, quote-unquote, progressive on their label? And for that matter, is there something more to Justice Democrats than just being Democrats? And all of that is going to be decided right now in the House because they, at this moment, have power and agency. No, they don't have power to make Joe Biden accept $15 an hour minimum wage. What they do have power is to make him make a choice. That, in and of itself, is a strength, especially when the president has been screaming about $15 an hour minimum wage, when the president doesn't back it, and when the president doesn't want to be caught lying about a campaign promise. Put him on the spot, is my point. Make him make a choice. Make him repudiate his own campaign pledge. This is the guy who said, America, I won't lie to you. I'm Joe Biden. I'm going to be the guy who tells you the truth. Fine. Make him tell you the truth. And make him either repudiate that plan or back it. That's what you can do as your job in the House. That's what you should do right now. This is the case where you need to force the vote. Blood and teeth on the field at this point. Location, cellular, and call record data revealed a call tying Proud Boy member to the Trump White House. The FBI has not determined what they discussed. The law enforcement officials would not reveal the names of either party. The same data has revealed no evidence of communication between the rioters and members of Congress during the January 6th attack on Congress, which goes against the allegations that some Republican lawmakers were active participants during the attack. Right-wing extremists, including members of the Oath Keepers, a militia group, have been working as security guards for Republicans and for Trump allies such as Roger Stone Jr. The Justice Department is looking into communications between Stone and far-right extremists to determine whether he played any role in the plans to disrupt the certification of January 6th. It was reported that former President Trump was scheduled to visit his hometown of New York on Sunday. The Biden administration will transform 2 Texas facilities where detained migrant families are being held into rapid processing centers, meaning adults and children who cross the border will be housed for a maximum of 72 hours before being released. The United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement said families will be detained at a 2,400-bed detention center in Carson City and a 839-bed detention center in Daly, Texas, for 3 days or less. Migrant families previously held at the third facility, the 96-bed Berks County Family Detention Center in Leesport, Pennsylvania, have all been released. That detention center will be reportedly used by ICE to hold adults. Thomas Homan, former acting director of ICE under Trump administration, argued Biden's team created a crisis at the border in record time by ending accomplishments made by the Trump administration within the first 40 days since Inauguration Day. Tom Homan's Biden's border... New York Governor Andrew Cuomo reiterated on Sunday that he had no plans to resign despite the fact that 2 more accusers have come forward over the weekend, taking the total number to 5. Karen Hitton and Anna Liss, who once served as an aide to the governor, both came forward with 2 stories to tell of Cuomo's inappropriate behavior in the past. In an over-the-phone press conference, Cuomo stated, quote, There is no way I resign. Let's do the Attorney General's investigation. Let's do the findings, and then we go from there. But I'm not going to be distracted by this either. Unquote. Two Democratic leaders of the New York State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins and House Speaker Carl E. Heastie have both called on Cuomo to resign amid the allegations. If I'm not mistaken, Heastie got close to calling for him to resign, but statement basically is saying time to go. Boris Johnson has requested for Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman jailed in Iran on spying charges, to be released permanently so that she could be reunited with her family in the UK. Zaghari Ratcliffe had been out of prison since last spring due to the coronavirus pandemic, but she was confined to house arrest at her parents' home. She also had these kind of ankle bracelets on to check her movements. Her sentence was due to end Sunday. She was arrested in April 2016 while traveling to visit her parents in Iran. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison over allegations of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government, which she denies. She has not yet had her British passport returned to her. Her family and the UK government have maintained her innocence and has been given diplomatic protection by the Foreign Office, meaning the case is being treated as a formal legal dispute between Britain and Iran. She's been released, but it's unclear on whether or not she's going to be let go, because apparently they are also thinking of other charges to be added. The case is very interesting, and we're going to have a conversation with Oliver, at the very least, about certain details of it and how the British government is seeing it, and even potential reasons for them to be holding her in the first place. Meanwhile, the U.S. military on Sunday delivered warnings to Iran by dispatching 2 Air Force B-52H Stratofortress bombers to the Middle East. It's the 4th time this year that the Pentagon has sent B-52s to the Middle East. In a statement from U.S. Central Command, it was said that the mission was designed to, quote, to deter aggression and reassure partners and allies of the United States military's commitment to security in the region, unquote. Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz has said that Tel Aviv is drafting new plans to attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure if he believes that Tehran is building nuclear weapons. He adds that Israel will make the move even without approval from its allies or other states. During a speech on March 7th, Iran's defense minister, Amir Hatami, has warned, quote, sometimes Israel makes big claims against the Islamic Republic of Iran out of desperation to allegedly threaten it, even though Tel Aviv knows that if it does a damn thing, we will raze Tel Aviv and Haifa to the ground. Administration officials have said that the United States is willing to meet with the international partners and Iran to discuss resurrecting a deal to limit Tehran's nuclear program. You know, you should see some of the things that Blinken are saying. I made the point, and I've been proven correct, that the moment that it becomes at odds, or the moment that there becomes a question of Iran's behavior and everything else, or what they're doing, they're going to forget what happened prior. Meaning the fact that Trump pulled out of the JCPOA is going to matter less. The fact that Joe Biden was in the administration where the JCPOA was formed and he doesn't immediately go back to it by relinquishing the sanctions doesn't matter. And the mainstream media who's looking at that story is not going to add in the context that the Trump administration basically pulled out of it and shot it in the face, and that Iran stayed with it for a year. They're going to talk about this stuff from an American context, an American perspective, and truth of it is going to fall through the floor. This is what is taking place. Joe Biden should have immediately went back to the JCPOA. He should have. And, you know, this brinksmanship is not helpful to anybody. Shane, what do you think? Or is the brinksmanship helpful? Is the brinksmanship just the natural language that leaders have to use in order to interact with foreign adversaries, even though they may have this kind of plan of, all right, we're going to bring this stuff back together towards the end? Meaning, if I say anything to you that's conciliatory, I'm going to be attacked by my opposition. If you say anything to me that's conciliatory, they're going to be attacked by the opposition. So you need a certain degree of bellicosity. You need a certain degree of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and we're going to do this if this happens. But in personal communications or private communications, it's yeah, we're working our way back to this JCPOA. We just can't do it in a way where we look bad in the process of doing it. Do you think it's that? Like that a lot of this stuff is basically theater with the point of getting back to the JCPOA? Or do you think, no, this is not theater at all? These guys actually mean this stuff. These guys are as belligerent as they seem. What are your thoughts?
At a certain point, I don't think it makes that much of a difference, because if they're making these comments, if they're committing themselves to these lines of response and attack and quote unquote defense, whatever, then they're going to have to follow through on it if push comes to shove, and it usually does if you're escalating the rhetoric. I don't think it's necessary. I do not. For one thing, I don't believe that if we were to back down an inch, our quote unquote adversaries would immediately try to take that inch from us every single time to the point where we've lost everything. I think that is farcical. I don't think that's how this would go. I think it's a false pretense that we put forward in order to do what we want to do, which is try to maintain our power at all costs. So I don't think that this kind of, I forget exactly what the word you used, this brinksmanship. I don't think that that's necessary. I think that that's our tack that we've taken up because it suited our interests historically. But this is also significant. Again, they're saying that Israel has said, Benny Gantz has said, they will attack without the permission or the approval of their allies. They will attack Iran's nuclear facilities preemptively. This, of course, leads me to worry about another manufactured WMD threat, where all of a sudden the word is coming out that Iran has successfully, or is very close to successfully creating nuclear weapons, and then Israel goes ahead and bombs them, and this sets off not just a regional but a world war. That doesn't seem like it's that far down in the deck. That seems like something that could come up pretty quickly if push comes to shove and they decide to do this. And again, they're saying that they will do it without our approval, without our permission, any of that stuff. Shouldn't we take that as an affront? I mean, if we see ourselves as world leaders, shouldn't we try to back them down in the public, not just by private means, but in the public, warn them away from doing this? Because I think that we do have more power than Israel. It seems like they're far more dependent on us than we are on them. Shouldn't we shouldn't we try to caution them against this? Again, not just privately, which I'm sure that, various people are trying to do, but publicly, where they will be forced to respond, and then we will be forced to respond to their response. What do you think, Jamarl?
I think Israel is willing to fight to the last dead American. I don't necessarily think they would be stupid enough to start a war with Iran by themselves. I do think they can drag us into one, then they would. And that's unfortunate. And that goes to the whole weapons of mass destruction stuff that you're talking about. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. And, I do think we could get dragged into a war with these guys. And, that's problematic because Iran is not Iraq. It's just not. And we saw what happened when we destroyed Iraq. It wasn't necessarily for our better interests, nor was it for Iraq's better interests, and it certainly wasn't for the Middle East's better interests. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones, with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you guys want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. You know, we have a great perch here because we get to look out at the rest of the world. And one of the stories that I came across yesterday was on Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, a British Iranian national that was basically being held on Iran on spying charges. She initially was held for a 5-year charge under the idea that she was trying to overthrow the government with this kind of propaganda. By the same token, she was held for nearly 5 years. She was held in house arrest during COVID. But she was released recently, but still this notion of her being able to leave is still up in the air. And the question becomes, when will she be able to leave? Now, this has become somewhat of a diplomatic matter at this point. And to have this conversation, we're joined by Peter Oliver. Peter Oliver is the EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of politics, political, diplomatic, economic news from across the European Union. Peter, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I came across the story, and it was something that was basically in UK politics. I thought you may be a good person to talk to about it. And I don't want to get too far into it because, you know, I know it's one of these ongoing cases, and there's not too much where you can hit on it with. But there was something that came up about this where elements in Britain were making the argument that the reason that she was being held had to do with an old war charge. Let's play the clip real quick before we go into this, because the clip is short. And this is a clip by one of the interviewers who were talking to, I think the woman's name is Sadiq. Tulip Sadiq. This is her constituency. And let's play the clip.
It is a sticking point, but it's one that the government's constantly said isn't relevant to imprisonment. So just to explain, we as a country owe around £400 million, and it is due to the tanks, as you say, that we purchased, and then we haven't paid the money back. They went through a court case, an extensive court case, in which it was decided that we do owe Iran the money. Now, I've been speaking to the Foreign Office, who have said that they are in the process of paying it back, and they are in the process of trying to pay it back. And there's actually kind of hearings in which they decide how the money will be paid back. Now, there's a direct correlation between every time one of those hearings for the debt is delayed, there's some kind of repercussion on Nazanin in Iran. So either she's been taken to questioned by the authorities, or she's been told she's going to get another sentence, or something happens every single time that the court case for the debt is delayed, or it's moved, or whatever happens to it, there's a direct impact.
Now, what's wild about this, she's also being called for another call back to court in Tehran again. So what's going on with this? I mean, like, is this really as simple as, well, there's all of this money that is owed, and because the money is owed, they're basically using her as a bargaining chip? Or is there something deeper here in regards to the charges? I mean, they're basically saying she was there for propagandistic reasons. What's more true in this? I mean, she worked for Reuters as... Go for it.
There are parallel issues running here, and they are linked, but they are different at the same time. In fact, we've heard just this morning on the British radio on the BBC, Lord MacDonald, who's the former permanent undersecretary of the Foreign Office. He retired last summer, saying that he believes that the case regarding Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is close to the end game. He did say that also there was moves afoot to pay back this money, these £400 million, around $550 million that the UK owes Iran. He said that the Foreign Office, as far as he was concerned, had acknowledged that this was Iranian money and it had to go back to Iran. The issue then is how, because Iran currently doesn't have access to funds in foreign bank accounts because of the US-backed sanctions that are in place upon it. Now, what we were hearing from Lord MacDonald was a suggestion that there may be room for some movement, that this may be something that the Biden White House is looking at, is to soften these sanctions that would allow Iran access to its bank accounts in foreign countries for humanitarian means. Now, that would allow the UK to say, put that money into one of these or several of these accounts, as long as it was being used for humanitarian means. Now, what is very clear from what Lord MacDonald was saying is that there can't be any sense of quid pro quo about this. That this can't, as far as the British side, I heard you talking before, guys, about losing face, about the great diplomatic game that has to be played, and Britain, as far as it's concerned, can't let this be seen as, we'll give you that money back if you release Nazim Zaghari Ratcliffe and other British Iranians that are currently in prison, because as far as the British government are concerned, that would be seen as giving in to hostage taking. Now, as far as the case with Zaghari Ratcliffe's concerned, she had her ankle tag removed over the weekend. She's completed the 5-year sentence. But she will face further charges that are coming next Sunday. In fact, she's supposed to face those charges. These, in a sense, relate back to the current Prime Minister. We don't know exactly what these charges will be that she'll face on Sunday, but it's understood that they're related to propaganda against the Iranian state. And in particular, what could be a twist to this are comments made by Boris Johnson back in 2017. Now, the current Prime Minister was then Foreign Secretary in the United Kingdom, and he said that Zaghari Ratcliffe had been in Iran training journalists. Now, that was seen as one of the biggest foot-in-mouth moments of Boris Johnson's tenure as Foreign Secretary, and there's actually a pretty good BBC documentary about his time in the Foreign Office, and it does seem like it was a time that was littered with those foot-in-mouth moments. But this is the big one, really, because those comments that were delivered to a House of Commons Select Committee may well be brought out by the prosecution in Iran come next Sunday and said, look, even the current Prime Minister, then Foreign Secretary, he was saying, you were sent here essentially as an agent of some kind, and that could be used to further the time that Nazim Zaghari Ratcliffe spends in prison. I think there's a lot of people obviously hoping that isn't going to be the case. They are expecting demonstrations outside of the Iranian embassy in London later on Monday. But this whole situation, that's the side regarding Zaghari Ratcliffe in prison. But with the money, it is a big step that Britain, or senior figures, even if they have retired from those positions, senior figures like the former permanent Undersecretary of the Foreign Office, Lord MacDonald, saying, yeah, we know this is Iran's money. We've been keeping it, and they have been keeping it since the late 1970s. The then Shah of Iran paid for 1,750 British chieftain tanks. He paid for them up front. He didn't receive any of them, and Britain kept the money. Now, it's since been shown that Britain needs to return that money. It does seem that they're now trying to work out exactly how they do it. That will, in turn, require some moves from Washington, because ultimately nothing happens. As we saw with Donald Trump pulling the US unilaterally out of the Iranian nuclear deal. If the US does something, that has impact upon everybody involved in it. Now, if the US was to relax those sanctions, allowing Britain to return that money through humanitarian means, put into or give Iranians access to bank accounts to be used for humanitarian means, and Britain was to put that money into one of those bank accounts, who knows? Perhaps we could see some movement. But the official line from the UK, of course, is there's no quid pro quo about this. They're not going to return the money in order to get people released.
Yeah, and politically, like I said, he get attacked for it by the opposition. Like, it's the same thing happened here. Obama got attacked for it. When Obama was trying to pay Iran money that they owed, I believe it was Iran, Republicans attacked him. Oh, Obama is giving the money. Obama is giving the money. And I suspect Boris Johnson would get hit with the same thing. And let's do this. Let's take an early break. The voice that you guys were listening to is Peter Oliver, EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Peter Oliver in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we continue to be joined by Peter Oliver. For those listening, he's the EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. And you can follow him on Twitter at PeterGOliver_RT. You can also catch his reporting weekly on RT International. Just go check out RT.com. We are joined again by Peter. We're going to be continuing the conversation on a couple of different topics here, talking about mask politics, mask self-dealing in the UK and in Germany. Let's start with Germany. I'll let you take the lead here, Peter, but several prominent members of parliament in the center right, in the CDU, have resigned and are coming under pressure because they engaged in mask self-dealing. Basically, they were involved with companies that made hundreds of thousands of euros on mask transactions. And, again, this is a big no-no in politics, preferential contracts that make you or your associates money. And what you were saying, I thought this was an interesting take, and we can segue into this too, is this clears a way with the Green Party in Germany taking a lead, basically. And as far as I can tell, please correct me if I'm wrong, potentially leading a coalition with the CSU and the CDU in German politics. What's the story here, Peter?
Well, they wouldn't be leading that coalition. They would be the junior partners, but it does look like we may be on track for our first Black-Green coalition. We'll get to that in a little bit, but the big scandal that's ongoing here, Maskgate, it hasn't been called yet, but it's just a matter of time. Nicholas Löbel from the Christian Democratic Union Party, that's Angela Merkel's party, and Georg Nusslein from the Christian Social Union, that's the CDU's Bavarian sister party of, well, they've been caught making money off the pandemic profiteering. Löbel, his company took around €250,000 for being the middleman in mask deals between producers and the government. Georg Nusslein, it seems, may have taken even more money. He's currently the subject of a corruption investigation in the state of Bavaria. He stood down from his position as the union's parliamentary group deputy leader. They've both said they're not going to run in September's election. They're not going to seek re-election. But the thing is they're intending to stay in post until that happens. Now, there are huge calls for them to quit straight away, clear your desk, be out of the office by the end of today, because they've got this election coming up. It's not a good look, as you mentioned, at all, to have been personally enriching oneself during a pandemic in which millions of people have suffered financially, not to mention, of course, the suffering that's gone on due to COVID-19 and deaths that have been caused through that. But the fact that these guys seem to have been using that opportunity to run their own little side projects, to be the middleman in mask deals. Now, Löbel, for instance, we've got a little bit more information about him. He could, if he stays in post, even though he's quit everything, walk away with around €70,000 if you take into account bonuses and different things and allowances that he's owed. that's not acceptable. And we've seen, well, it's not acceptable for the Christian Democratic Union Party. We've seen the health minister, Jens Spahn, who's, he's also facing his own little inquiries into what's gone on with his finances, is coming out and saying these people have to quit, and they have to quit now. The reason is that election that's coming up in September is very much getting into everybody's focus. But before we get to that election, there are two big local elections here in Germany next week, one in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate and one in the state of Baden-Württemberg. Now, Baden-Württemberg is probably worthwhile keeping a very close eye on, because Baden-Württemberg is currently run by the Green Party. Winfried Kretschmann is the minister president, the leader of that state, about as close as you can get, but not really the same as a state governor in the US. He's probably the most powerful Green politician in the world. I think there's a very good shout for saying that, because of just the sheer size of Baden-Württemberg as a state and its importance in terms of the economy for Germany. He's the main man there. And for the Greens, what we are seeing is the Green Party have done very well out of this pandemic when it comes to popular support. The most recent polling nationally puts the Union, that's the Christian Democratic Union, and the Christian Social Union on 32% of the vote. The Green Party on 19% of the vote. Germany is almost always, but yeah, always ruled by a coalition. And there's a lot of talk about the Union, the Black Party, siding with the Greens, the Green Party. That would currently give them 51%. It would allow them to create a government if the election had been held yesterday. It would be the slimmest of margins, but it's important because it's going to be the first post-Angela Merkel German Bundestag elections. What the Greens would bring is still all up for grabs, really. We still don't know who's going to be standing for the Union, the CDU-CSU, as their chancellor candidate, whether it's going to be the new leader of the Christian Democratic Union, Armin Laschet, or whether it's going to be the leader of the state of Bavaria, Markus Söder. Whoever does that, they're pretty much on a similar line to Angela Merkel when it comes to foreign policy. If they were to partner up with the Greens, you may find German policy having to change on major issues, and I'm thinking particularly when it comes to Russia. We've heard from Omid Nurpur, who is the foreign policy spokesperson for the Green Party. He's very keen for Germany to take a harder line with Russia, particularly over things like Nord Stream 2, particularly on things like Crimea, Donbass, Alexei Navalny. All of these issues would be, they're not, Germany and Russia are at loggerheads over a lot of those, if not all of those issues right now, but they would be a lot less of a smooth run between Moscow and Berlin with the Greens is part of that coalition. But ultimately, we've talked about this before, it may well come down to the money. And you're looking at, particularly when it comes to Nord Stream 2 and Green Party opposition to that, it may just come down to sheer necessity, because at the moment, Germany requires 90 billion cubic meters of gas every year. By 2034, that's going to be jumping to 110 billion cubic meters of gas. That's as Germany phases out its nuclear program and its coal-fired power stations. They need that gas when that gas comes from Russia for the main part, to fill in the gaps, to take up the slack. So there will be quid pro quo when it comes to these arguments, these discussions. It seems very likely that we will try to get a coalition between the centre-right Union and the Greens. There certainly, almost certainly anyway, won't be a repeat of the coalition we have right now here in Germany. The Social Democrats, the oldest party extant in Germany, they've been in government with Angela Merkel since the last election, and it hasn't worked well for them.
That's what I was going to say. They've been getting crushed. Well, yeah, Peter, that's what I was going to say. Their numbers in that coalition with Angela Merkel did not do well. And I remember there were times where I can't think of the guy's name. He was president of the European Union, if I'm not mistaken. I could see him.
Oh dear, this is terrible. I can't believe you've done that to me, Jamarl. Yes, Martin Schulz.
That's it, right? That's it.
I got there in the end.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I remember that these guys were getting crushed in the polling as a result, and even there was consideration with these guys pulling out. What on earth does a center-right and a Green Party coalition, like, how does that even work? Where is is that just a marriage of convenience in order to take power? Or is there some kind of odd coalition, some odd mix between these two where it just works? Like, what am I missing?
The Greens in Germany are very much the party of your, without wanting to sound too condescending, educated, middle-class urbanites. And generally, your quite moneyed middle classes will vote for the Green Party here in Germany. Those are also similar people that want to see things that a lot of centre-right politicians will push forward. There's a pro-business element to the Greens that's very strong. There's even the potential of there being what's called the Jamaica Coalition, which is the union of the centre-right, the Free Democratic Party, which is the liberal, economically liberal party here, and the Greens. Now that would certainly give them off the top of my head now 60% if they were to, based on the voting that was yesterday. That has problems because the Greens and the free business and green policy business doesn't always mix. But when you put the Green Party's pro-business with a green agenda with the union's pro-business centre-right policies, they do kind of gel a little bit from time to time here in Germany.
I can see that. That is visible. If you cross your eyes very slightly, that makes perfect sense. Where would this leave the SPD?
In opposition, licking their wounds with a need to really start again. There needs to be a root and branch. It's not easy being the junior partner in a coalition, and I think anybody leaving those government offices in the Bundestag from the Social Democrats would probably say to anybody from the Greens, if we say that they're going in there, be careful what you wish for, because being the junior partner means you're usually the whipping boy for what happens with anything that goes wrong. And we have seen that a little bit. The fact that the Social Democrats have been toothless when it comes to pushing back on anything that their electorate would not have sided with, because you've gone for the centre right with the centre left. There are things that they butt heads very much square on about, and every time that happens, because they're the junior partners, the SPD loses. So they need to go away and have a think. And some years in opposition may well do them good, to be honest, because they have on a national level they've dropped off really, really badly. I mean, they're on 16 points right now. It has been a lot worse in the past. They need to have a think about what's going on and what they stand for.
So speaking about polling, let's jump to the UK for a moment. Boris Johnson is dominating. I was looking at the polling yesterday. Johnson is up like 13 points. And the question becomes, what on earth is Labour doing for Johnson to be up 13 points? Is part of it the destruction of Corbyn in the way that these guys were able to just carve off part of the left? Is it the way Johnson has dealt with the vaccine rollout? What is it that Johnson is doing, or for that matter, the Tory party is doing, that is able to not just keep the Labour voters? Because you had some of the positions that, whether people realize it or not, Johnson was able to win some seats that Labour had held from the beginning. Skinner, for example. Skinner had his seat for, since Jesus. And yet, he was able to be taken out by Johnson with the Brexit referendum. I mean, basically, I'm here fighting for the Brexit referendum. I'm fighting for justice and all this other stuff, and for you guys to make a referendum vote and stand by it. Well, Johnson was able to win that. And the question was, would he be able to hold it? And it seems like the answer is yes. And there's even concern about a snap election taking place for him to accentuate the lead and trying to get into office. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, why, first, does Johnson have this dominant lead like this? And what is Labor doing to fail so badly?
The Conservative Party and Boris Johnson's very good at shaping the message to what they want it to be. And the focus that they keep playing on at the moment isn't the nearly 130,000 people that have died from COVID, the mishandling of the pandemic, the mishandling of PPE. They haven't focused on these things. They've kept that well out of the agenda. They focused on the vaccine, on the rollout of that vaccine across the UK, which has been a success, but they've made sure that stays the front and center story. They've kept the news away from the fact that Matt Hancock, the health secretary, was found to have broken the law when it comes to handing out of contracts. We were talking about these two politicians here in Germany. They've quit over six-figure sums that granted, they did use them. They did use the PPE deals to enrich themselves, but you're talking about billions and billions and billions in contracts that Matt Hancock, as the health secretary, should have made the tender process for those contracts open and transparent. He didn't. He was found by the High Court to have broken the law, and the
landlord giving huge amounts of money to his former landlord, the owner of a pub. Am I right on this, Peter?
That's exactly right. Hundreds of millions for contracts for two companies that had no experience, many of which then didn't deliver on what was needed. There's been no repercussions for that. We've moved on. We've talked about the vaccine more and more. If you look at the news in the UK today, you won't hear anything about Matt Hancock or the Conservative parties having used the pandemic to enrich their friends. You will only hear about royal interviews and everything that goes with that. This is what the Conservatives are good at doing at the moment, and this is also where Labour fails under Keir Starmer. He's not good at pinning Boris Johnson down on the mistakes that he's made and on giving those ultimately soundbite, charismatic type of.
This is soundbite politics.
With people over.
Yeah, but that's unfortunate because there is a PMQs. And you would think that the PMQs would be the area where Starmer could try to get his hands on him. I mean, Joe Biden hasn't even given a speech since he's, hasn't sat down with the press.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the case. If Prime Minister's questions, there's been questions asked by Keir Starmer, but Boris Johnson doesn't answer questions. Boris Johnson plays sound bites, and ultimately, if you can keep asking questions, Boris Johnson will just keep not answering them.
I see what you mean.
Problem is
we've got to close it here, Peter. Peter, no, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining for these great conversations, and literally on point here. I just got a headline coming through from Sky News based out of the UK about how the Queen and Prince Philip aren't behind comments about Archie's skin killer. According to Oprah Winfrey, this is not on their mind. Matt Hancock's mistakes and how the Conservative Party is having to reckon with them. Well, they're not, because they're not really being criticized over it. But we've got to talk about that more later. We were joined for that segment and the last by Peter Oliver, the EU correspondent for RT International. He provides daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union, and you can follow him on Twitter at PeterGOliver_RT. Also catch his reporting weekly on RT International. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we will be back in a minute talking about the Indian government threatening jail for Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter employees, what this means for Indian politics, Indian tech, as well as global politics and tech on the other side of this short break. We'll be back in a minute.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking about India's tech policy. This comes as Narendra Modi's government has threatened jail time for employees of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter for basically not pushing the perspective they want, not keeping down the opinions they want on the ongoing farmers' protests. We've been having this conversation over the past couple of months as those protests have continued, and we're joined for this conversation and its effects not just on Indian tech and politics, but on global tech, by Sham Sharma. He's a political and cultural commentator and the creator of the Sham Sharma Show, a voice for India's indigenous culture. And you can follow Sham on Twitter at Sham Sharma Show, and on YouTube at the Sham Sharma Show Global. Sham, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me on.
Hey, thank you for being with us. Let's get right into the conversation here. Basically, the story is India's government wants to set up these posts within Twitter and these other social media companies, including Facebook and WhatsApp, basically letting the Indian government send in complaints about certain accounts, what they're doing, and basically get the tech companies to respond by suspending, blocking, deleting posts, whatnot. This conflict specifically revolves around the ongoing farmers' protests, and I will note is an interesting mirror to what the United States is doing in its relationship with tech companies. Although the Indian government is instead of threatening employees with jail time here in the United States, we're threatening the owners of these companies with widespread antitrust lawsuits that we could use to gut them. And who knows what would come on the other side? Nationalization, just opening the space for competitors. I don't know. In any event, in India, they're threatening employees of these companies with jail time. And I want to go to you. What do you think about this? Is this justified? What's your take?
Yeah, well, I obviously do not think it's justified. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure where the news of the government threatening the employees of these companies with jail time is necessarily coming from. I read the article in Wall Street Journal that essentially said that people that know about these laws are saying that the government is threatening them with jail time. From what I've read up about these new rules that have been sort of brought in by the government, the government has said that these are more guidelines than hard and fast rules. But I was not able to find anything about like jailing employees of the companies if they did not comply. What I did find was that the government was trying to implement steps like the United States have also brought in terms of antitrust legislations and maybe stopping access of these companies to the Indian market.
Well, okay. So the inside right here, the Indian government wrote letters to Facebook and Twitter citing specific employees in the country who risked jail time if the firms didn't comply, per the Wall Street Journal. Well, even if they were guidelines, and it said those guidelines, basically these particular employees are breach of X guideline or Y guideline, it is still kind of a veiled threat, right? Like, we will put this particular person in jail if you continue doing X or Y. Because the last thing the Indian government wants is that the social media companies to basically put out the information for the protests. And by the way, there's even this aspect where they were trying to get data related to the farmers and related to the people who are protesting. I guess I look at it from our lens. And if I think the U.S. government would be interested in doing such or will have issues with propagating such with the Indian government, and my answer is yes, they would.
Right. I'm sorry. Could you repeat what the question was there again?
All right. So basically what I'm getting at is I'm pointing out that they are making the point that these are guidelines. Even if these are guidelines, you don't necessarily doubt that the breach of the guideline could be indicative of jail time, and that by citing the specific employees that could be in breach of those guidelines, that is somewhat of a veiled threat. Like, I guess I'm making the point that it is a veiled threat. And I'm saying the guidelines in and of themselves, breaching those guidelines, especially if breaching guidelines is indicative of jail time, then that is basically the way they're reporting it. Like, I guess what I'm getting at is, you don't see that. You don't see that the breach of the guidelines is the same thing as them threatening with jail time.
I don't. That's not what I got from the article. But even if, let's say, if I concede that, all right, breaching of the guidelines can lead to jail time, that's obviously wrong. The fact that the most wrong that I find in the guidelines that have been mentioned is when the government says that it is going to be able to ask these social media companies to remove objectionable or immoral material. My problem with that is that's a very, very broad category. That's a very broad definition. Anything can be found immoral or objectionable by pretty much anyone on the internet. So,
true.
Unless you're defining very clearly what you mean when you say that the government is going to need to ask social media companies to remove objectionable or immoral material, it's very unfair on the companies to then follow your guidelines. That's the biggest problem that I had when I was reading these guidelines that the government has brought in. Other than that, I think there is, a need for the Indian government to act when it comes to the behavior of the social media companies. How the government acts is obviously a very good point, and I think obviously a very good, a big bone of contention. But I think there is a need for the Indian government to take some sort of an action or have some sort of a discussion with social media companies, because the government pointed out when they were talking about these rules, they pointed out very clearly that these companies seem to have different standards when it comes to different countries. For example, in the United States, when the Capitol, and I think they cited this example themselves as well, that in the United States, when the Capitol Hill insurrection happened, the social media companies took a stand and they deleted a lot of pretty high-profile accounts, QAnon accounts that, let's say, were in favor of either the riots or they were in favor of even the Stop the Steal rallies.
Well, and Trump. I mean, let's just not leave this out. You're talking about high-profile accounts. There is no account higher profile than the president of the freaking United States. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not trying to be too nationalistic here, but Twitter took his account down. Facebook, blocked his messaging, all that. So you can get back to it.
Right.
I'm just saying that that is the prime example.
Yeah, precisely. And they wouldn't have done that if Trump had won. I really don't think they would have deleted his account if Trump had actually won the election. So in the United States, the social media companies were very quick to try and ingratiate themselves to the new regime so that the new regime would not take any action against them. But in India, a very similar thing happened on the 26th of January, where the protesters that were given a particular route to protest and that were given a set of guidelines what you can do and what you should not be doing in the protest, they broke all those guidelines. In fact, a bunch of barricades were set up between the protesters and important Indian monuments like the Red Fort. They broke through the barricades and they broke into the Red Fort. They threw down the flag of India. They desecrated the Red Fort. There was a lot of public property damage that was also done. Police officers were attacked. A lot of police officers got hurt. Some got seriously hurt as well. And so a lot of big social media accounts, not just from India, but from overseas, openly called for this kind of violence and were openly supporting this kind of violence. And so the Indian government, I think, rightly asked that, hey, if you're willing to take these steps against major American social media accounts after violence happens in your country, why are you not willing to do the same when?
Please do the same here. Yeah, I hear you completely. I mean, please, we should be able. I'm speaking on behalf of the Indian government, not that I'm really trying to. Right. Basically, they're saying you should do the same thing here. We want to set up a process where we can, basically submit our complaints, give you specific examples of people who are doing these things that are against our law, and you should take those accounts down. And I hear you on that. There's an argument there, but I think we both agree that the way that these things are being, the way that the guidelines are being written, the way this stuff is laid out in India is too broad right now. And like in the United States, I am worried that those broad definitions in India, it's immoral and objectionable behavior. In the United States, it's misinformation or domestic extremism, these kinds of things. I'm worried that in both cases, these are like very broad umbrellas that we're using to shut out speech. That we've only got a minute left, but any quick last thoughts? Where do we agree or disagree on that? What are your thoughts, Sean?
I actually do agree with you because, like I said again, the parameters, the way they have been defined, are extremely broad. And so, if the government does bring in, let's say, laws, right now they're quote unquote guidelines, but if they bring in quote unquote laws and they use the same parameters to define those laws, that gives the government, unfortunately, very broad-ranging powers to then act on either individuals or social media companies. So in my opinion, if they are trying to bring in these laws eventually, I think what's very, very important is to define what, moral, objectionable, or wrong kind of speech is in those laws extremely clearly.
I would agree with that. And for it's not my country. In some sense, my say-so is worthless there, and America's say-so is worthless. But I agree with you. If you're going to do that kind of thing, you want to make it extremely narrow and extremely clear, so that people know when they're crossing the line, and so that people have protection, so that justice isn't applied selectively. Regardless, we're at a time. We were joined by Sham Sharma, political cultural commentator and the creator of the Sham Sharma Show. Check that out on Twitter at Sham Sharma Show, also on YouTube. You're listening to Fault Lines. We will be back in a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show in American and global politics. That means you're listening to Fault Lines, bringing you news, events, and politics from across the states and around the world. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Quick heads up. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a great morning. For those who want to check out earlier portions on our show, giving you a little table of contents here. At 7:30, we talked with Ted Rall about Governor Cuomo's 2 new sexual assault allegations, how his political career is faring, where he'll go, whether he can survive this next election. At 7:45, we took calls, talked about the $15 minimum wage with Ted. Also had a quick spat over Force the Vote, this push to force a vote in Congress on Medicare for all. Anyway, go back and check that out if you've been following that issue. At 8:15, we spoke with Peter Oliver about a sort of ongoing conflict between the Iranian government and the UK over the imprisonment of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, also money the UK owes Iran. Then at 8:30, we spoke with Peter, continuing that conversation about politics in Germany, over mask self-dealing, with several politicians promising not to rerun for election in the next election after they made hundreds of thousands of euros in profit over mask sales. We continued that with a brief talk about what was going on in UK politics, with conservatives taking the lead despite very similar allegations against Matt Hancock, who gave out billions of pounds of public funds to friends and associates in what appears to be cronyism. And we just finished up a conversation with Sham Sharma about the Indian government and its relationship with tech companies, including Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter, over how they're handling the ongoing protests in India, the ongoing farmers' protests. And in a couple of minutes, we'll be joined by Howie Hawkins talking about the Green Party's perspective on H.R. 1, whether it shuts third-party opposition out. But before we get to that interview, let's go into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, numbers are continuing to go down, with at least 682 new coronavirus deaths and 40,336 new cases reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 58,745 cases per day. That is a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. Numbers are continuing to go down, but they're somewhat stabilizing. For weeks there, we had 30%, even higher than that, 35% or so drops on a rolling 2-week basis. Then it slowed to 20. Now it's down to 12. We'll see if it flatlines, what happens in the next month or so. As of this morning, more than 29,034,100 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 524,500 have died from it. President Joe Biden's relief bill aimed at helping Americans deal with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic was approved by the Senate on Saturday. The bill received extensive pushback from Republicans who said the plan is too costly. Specifically, GOP Senator John Barrasso slammed Biden for pushing his $1.9 trillion stimulus package through Congress despite pledging to work with Republicans on it. In a statement from Barrasso, he claims, quote, "When people find out what's in this bill, they're going to lose a lot of any enthusiasm they may have for it right now, because this was not really about coronavirus in terms of the spending. This was a liberal wish list of liberal spending, just basically filled with pork. It didn't need to be this way," end quote. The $1.9 trillion plan allocates $350 billion to state and local governments and some $130 billion to schools. It also provides $49 billion for expanded COVID-19 testing and research, as well as $14 billion for vaccine distribution. That still leaves $1.4 trillion unaccounted for, at least in that official, sort of breakdown of it. But I mean, coming back to what Barrasso was saying here, I think that what most people are going to notice about this bill is A, they're getting $1,400 stimulus checks out of it, and B, if you have kids, you're getting this $300 a month child tax credit going forward. I think those are the main takeaways from this bill for people. Oh, and a $15 minimum wage, which was being talked about, isn't in this bill. I think this is what most people are going to notice, frankly. Jamarl, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's what they're going to notice. I think people notice what they get out of those things. And so it's like if you are a parent with a kid and all of a sudden the government is giving you $300 extra to help raise your kid, I think you're going to remember that. And you're going to say, whoa, Joe Biden did that. You know what I mean? Like if Joe Biden gave if he just came out and gave the 2,000, used the power that it was his discretion, they would say, wow, Joe Biden fulfilled his campaign promise. Meaning, just do it. The public is paying attention. The public has a unique focus on what you're doing at this moment, or for that matter, what you're not doing at this moment. Do it. You shouldn't have to be in this indignant position of pushing for $15 an hour minimum wage when the president has said, I am for this, when the candidate, Joe Biden, has said, I am for this, when the candidate, Joe Biden, got into a big fight with Donald Trump back and forth over this. You shouldn't have to fight this hard. Like, it's so indignant. I mean, even the healthcare thing, you have 500,000 people die, you have to make the argument that Medicare for all should be the healthcare plan. Or for that matter, that people shouldn't have to go into debt for healthcare. Or school, for that matter. It's like these things, I don't know, man. It just feels like these things shouldn't necessarily have to be fought so hardly for, especially when they're in the best interests of human beings. And if nothing else, the $15 an hour minimum wage was something that Joe Biden said he was going to do. He should have did it. Period. And I agree with you, Shane. That's what people are going to remember. Joe Biden did this. I got this. I didn't get this. That's what they're going to remember.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to remember the other stuff. They're not even going to know the other stuff.
I hear you. This is an interesting conversation that I want to get into, but I mean, quick research. I want to come back to this. How many people actually work minimum wage? Because by my count right now, it's like 500,000 people, which really isn't that many. I would have thought a lot of people not making that much money in this country, a lot of people living in poverty conditions. How many are actually earning the minimum wage? Back in 2017, which is the latest I can find, 542,000 workers. That's definitely a chunk of people.
How many people were making $12 an hour?
That's not 10 million.
That's the question.
I don't know.
It's the $10 an hour, $11 an hour. I mean, those people are still getting like a $4 an hour jump in their pay. Can't exclude them.
They would be. Anybody under $15 across the board, which a lot of people in different states would be getting a big jump in their pay. We should come back to this with an economist, talk about the specifics of those numbers, how many people this minimum wage increase would actually affect. It's a very interesting conversation, but let's get back into the headlines. In national political news, location, cellular, and call record data revealed a call tying a Proud Boys member to the Trump White House. The FBI has not determined what was discussed in that call. Law enforcement officials would not reveal the names of either party. That same data has revealed no evidence of communications between the rioters and members of Congress during the January 6th attack on Congress, which goes against the allegations that some Republican lawmakers were active participants during the attack. Right-wing extremists, including members of the Oath Keepers, a militia group, have been working as security guards for Republicans and for Trump's allies, such as Roger J. Stone Jr. The Justice Department is looking into communications between Stone and far-right extremists. That phrase, far-right extremists, want to talk about that. Anyway, looking into communications between Stone and them to determine whether he played any role in the plan to disrupt the certification on January 6th. It was reported that former President Trump was scheduled to visit his hometown of New York on Sunday. The Biden administration will transform 2 Texas facilities where detained migrant families are being held into rapid processing centers, meaning adults and children who cross the border will be housed for a maximum of 72 hours before being released. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE folks, said families will be detained at a 2,400-bed detention center in Karnes City and an 839-bed detention center in Dilley, Texas, for 3 days or less. Migrant families previously held at a third facility, the 96-bed Berks County Family Detention Center in Leesport, Pennsylvania, have all been released. That detention center will reportedly be used by ICE to hold adults now. Thomas Homan, the former acting director of ICE under the Trump administration, argued Biden's team created a crisis at the border in record time, quote unquote, by ending accomplishments made by the Trump administration within the first 40 days since Inauguration Day. Back to Cuomo news. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo reiterated on Sunday that he had no plans to resign, despite the fact that 2 more accusers have come forward over the weekend. That takes the total number to 5 accusers now. Karen Hinton and Anna Liss, who once served as an aide to the governor, have both come forward with their own stories to tell of Cuomo's inappropriate behavior in the past. In an over-the-phone press conference, Cuomo stated, quote, "There is no way I resign. Let's do the Attorney General investigation. Let's do the findings, and then we go from there. But I'm not going to be distracted by this either," end quote. 2 Democratic leaders of New York State House, State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins and House Speaker Carl E. Heastie, have called on Cuomo to resign amid these allegations. And again, we had this conversation with Ted Rall back at 7:30. Go check that out if you're interested in hearing more. In international political news, Boris Johnson has requested for Nazine Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman jailed in Iran on spying charges, to be released permanently so that she can be reunited with her family in the UK. Zaghari-Ratcliffe had been out of prison since last spring due to the coronavirus pandemic, but was confined to house arrest at her parents' home. Her sentence was due to end on Sunday. She was arrested in April 2016 while traveling to visit her parents in Iran and was sentenced to 5 years in prison over allegations of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government, which she has denied. She has not yet had her British passport returned to her. Her family and the UK government have maintained her innocence, and she has been given diplomatic protection by the Foreign Office, meaning the case is treated as a formal legal dispute between Britain and Iran. And part of what seems to be at issue here is hundreds of billions of pounds worth of money that the British government owes to Iran for an arms deal that they can't get to Iran because Iran has been locked out of, I believe it's the SWIFT system. They can't, do certain types of international transactions. They can't receive funds, basically. Their banks cannot receive funds from other countries, basically because in 2012, the U.S. imposed that specific blockage. And the U.S., just to give people a little bit of background here, the U.S. can't force SWIFT to do this, but the U.S. threatened the board members of SWIFT, this international financial transaction service. They threatened the board members of SWIFT with sanctions if they didn't do it. So sanctions are our tool on pretty much everybody. Either we sanction Iran or we sanction people for not sanctioning Iran. And we just kind of keep doing that until we sanction ourselves at some point. But hey, we've got to come back to that later. Meanwhile, the U.S. military on Sunday delivered warnings to Iran by dispatching 2 Air Force B-52H Stratofortress bombers to the Middle East. It's the 4th time this year that the Pentagon has sent B-52s to the Middle East. In a statement from U.S. Central Command, it was said that the mission was designed, quote, to deter aggression and reassure partners and allies of the U.S. military's commitment to security in the region, end quote. Israel Defense Minister Benny Gantz has said that Tel Aviv is drafting new plans to attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure if it believes that Tehran is building nuclear weapons, which in my opinion is insane. Sets us up for another WMD manufactured crisis. He adds that Israel will make the move even without approval from its allies or any other state, which again, you'd think the United States would publicly caution against, would try to step them back from that, even potentially threaten sanctions against Israel if they don't walk back their threats
that's not gonna
engage in
happen.
war without the approval. It's not going to happen. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's
saying
not
it's
gonna
still.
happen. But just
I
two
hear
points.
you.
Iran says that's not true. Iran keeps saying that's not the reason that this is happening, etc. That this is, but who knows? For the Israel part, all countries say that. I mean, Israel is more bellicose with it. But all countries will basically make the claim that we don't need our allies to defend ourselves. We will act in our nation's interests. And unfortunately, what is it? Netanyahu, for the last 20 years, have been arguing that Iran was at the brink of a bomb in the next month. So, from the standpoint of reality, they're not necessarily there. And it's hard to know what's even the reality that they themselves believe on this front. I don't believe for a minute that they think Iran has a nuclear weapon. I don't even think they believe that Iran is on the way to making a nuclear weapon. Would they use this language in order to try to get some kind of political or international grandstanding? Yes. Yes, they would. And would it potentially drag the U.S. into something? Yes. So, yeah, Shane, I hold your fears with this one. I agree with you, man.
I'm going to hold strong to that. Well, of course, we talk about this story regularly. We will be coming back to it more in the future. One more quick headline here. We were also talking about this earlier on in the show with Peter Oliver. A German MP, Nicholas Lerbel, a member of Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU party, will reportedly quit parliament and not seek re-election due to a recent scandal over face mask business deals. The company owned by Lerbel brokered deals between a Chinese face mask manufacturer and healthcare companies. Lerbel, who initially defended his deal as in line with the market, quote unquote, was bombarded with calls to resign, and on Sunday announced that he would retire from politics at the end of August, not seeking re-election. George Nusslein, a CSU lawmaker from Bavaria, has also been accused of lobbying the government on behalf of a mask supplier last year. Nusslein denied any wrongdoing, but resigned on Friday. And as we spoke about with Peter, this comes as German politics is in shape for a remaking with a potential coalition between the CDU-CSU union and the Green Party in Germany. And with that as a segue, we're closing headlines out, and we will be back with a member of the Green Party in the United States, Hallie Hawkins, talking about H.R. 1 and what it would mean for third parties in the U.S. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So the Democratic Party has been pushing basically a overhaul of our voting system. Now, you can imagine why one president basically screamed that he was robbed and cheated. And from their standpoint, the president was not robbed and cheated. And honestly, voting rights should have been something that should have been dealt with going all the way back to Gore, if not prior. especially in the way that the districts are drawn and the gerrymandering and everything else. If the Democratic Party cared about their voting electorate, it looks like they would have done something to protect the voting electorate, whether it was from the voter ID laws, whether it was from interstate cross-check, etc., etc., etc. In this very specific case, the package, H.R. 1, would automatically register people to vote and restore voting rights of felons. It would also mandate more than 2 weeks early voting, encourage voting by mail, and expand absentee ballot drop boxes across the country, along with other provisions meant to address concerns raised by election officials in the 2020 election cycle. Problem. What about third parties? Meaning, just because it has good things for the main or primary party, let's say the Democratic Party, and look, I've argued it is in their best interest to do something like this, considering that this is the electorate, this is their electorate per se, and they want to make sure their electorate can get to the polls. By the same token, it doesn't necessarily do the Green Party well in the way that the Green Party is saying, meaning this H.R. 1 is going to suppress third parties. H.R. 1, and this is the Green Party, and we're going to speak to Howie about this. H.R. 1 would inflate the amount of money National Party committees can give to candidates from $5,000 to $100 million. It will, let me see, instead of trying to, well, let's do this. Let's bring on Howie. It's no point in me going through it. Howie's here to do this. Howie, the voice, we're going to bring on Howie Hawkins, co-founder of the Green Party of the United States, presidential nominee for the Green Party in the 2020 election, gubernatorial nominee for the Green Party of New York in 2010, 2014, 2018, as well as trade unionist, environmental activist, and retired Teamster. Howie Hawkins, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I was going through the various provisions, but I thought, well, Howie's here to go through the various provisions. But you guys were pretty strong on this. I've been following the story for maybe a week or so. And initially when H.R. 1 came out, it was like, wow, this is great. They're actively trying to stabilize the voting system. But then you find out that there's other things that are buried in this that makes it that much more difficult for third parties to run. Can you speak about this? And one more thing, could you, well, let's speak about it first, and we can further the story as we talk about it. But from the Green Party's perspective, what is the problem with H.R. 1?
This is a very complex piece of legislation. It's 791 pages. It rolls in 60 different pieces of legislation into one omnibus bill. And the things you listed are very important. They would secure at the federal level voting rights and access to the ballot and stopping partisan gerrymandering and a whole lot of things that the Republicans at the state level are now trying to legislate to suppress the black vote, the Latino vote, and to gerrymander their way into extra power that overrepresents them in state legislatures and Congress. So it's vital that the bill pass. The problem is that within there is a public funding program. It's a matching funds program. And it's accessible to major parties, but not the Green Party or third parties, because the thresholds are so high. There is a current public funding program for presidential candidates for the primaries. It's a matching fund program. And you basically have to raise $100,000 by raising $5,000 in 20 states in contributions of $250 or less. I was the only candidate that applied for that program running for president last year because the major party candidates, if you accept that money, you have to limit how much private money you can spend. The limit was $52 million.
And just so we're clear, the point is the major parties don't really use that provision because they don't need the provision. It's a provision for third parties. And they basically up the amount of money necessary for you to even reach the provision itself. They made it more difficult. They made a higher hurdle for something that only third parties would use.
Well, this public funding program was set up after Watergate, and all the major party candidates used it until 2000. Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, H.W. Bush, and it was George W. Bush that first didn't go for the primary matching funds, and then 8 years later, Barack Obama, who didn't go for the fall public funding, which is an equal grant for each candidate, which is really the best way to do public funding.
And when you accept that money, you can't spend private money. So the problem for third parties in this bill is that the public funding program it sets up is beyond the reach of third parties. So it's going to be adding public money to major party candidates without limiting how much private money gets thrown into the system. So it's a reform that doesn't really reform.
What else is in the bill that's problematic from the standpoint of the Green Party beyond just the matching funds? Because I'm reading this and it says there's multiple poison pills that are basically built into H.R. 1. What other problems do you have with the bill?
Well, it's all within the matching funds program. You named one of them. The amount of money that national party committees can give to presidential candidates is increased from the limit from 5,000 to 100 million. And the problem with that is each party has 3 national committees, the national committee itself and a House campaign committee and a Senate campaign committee. And so big donors can give over $100,000 to those committees. So that's the way the fat cats can throw money into the election, while the little people can only, in the case of this matching funds program, if you give over $1,000, none of your money will be matched. The match goes up to $200. It's a 6-to-1 match. Here's another problem. You match 6-to-1, you increase the disparity between different candidates and their public funding 7 times. For example, say you got $1 million that can be matched, you get $7 million. Say you got $5 million that can be matched, that's $35 million. So the difference grows from what is it? 6 million, 4 million between the 2 candidates to 28 million in terms of the public funding once you do that match. So it actually increases the difference between the better funded candidates and the lower funded candidates, which is not a way of leveling the playing field, which public funding is supposed to do.
And so just to be specific here, what would you recommend as a provision that would level the playing field? I want to, there's also a larger conversation about whether these rule changes have been done intentionally in order to keep third-party candidates out of the realm of probability. But first, I think it makes sense. What do you suggest as a replacement? What should we go to or go back to, Howie?
Yeah, back in the 1990s and early 2000s, progressives were pushing what's called the clean money, clean elections model. It's full public campaign financing. So once you opt in and qualify, you get an equal grant. All the candidates who qualify get an equal grant to run their campaigns, and they run on no private money. We do this at the state level in Maine, Arizona, and Connecticut. We do it at the presidential level in the fall election, the general election, although since Obama dropped out, none of the major party candidates have used it. But that model is, it levels the playing field, and it takes the private money out if you accept that public money. So, ironically, back in the 90s, even Senator Joe Biden signed on to a clean money, clean elections model bill for congressional elections with progressives like Paul Wellstone. But progressives in this country have forgotten all about that. Now they're saying, we'll get matching funds. But as I pointed out, it doesn't level the playing field. In fact, it increases the disparities between candidates who are publicly funded.
I have a hard time believing it's not intentional. And the reason I say that is if you look at, like you said, the House of Representatives and some of those races, the changes that hit the hardest are the ones that hit the hardest on the presidential race. And I suspect that's because if you were running in the House of Representatives, you would need, meaning you want the matching funds, you want all of the bonuses that you can get from that. But on the presidential side, the candidate that typically runs is going to be a Democrat, it's going to be a Republican, it's going to be somebody from the third party, and you want to diminish the ability for the third party to be able to compete. I suspect strongly that that's where that's coming from. How do you see it, Howie? I mean, do you think this is... And the reason I say this, when you look at Hillary Clinton and you look at, let's say, Joe Biden, even if you look at Al Gore, the argument that is consistently made is that the Green Party is, quote unquote, stealing votes from the Democratic Party. Now, this is ludicrous. That's like saying the Republican Party is stealing votes from the Democratic Party. People vote for the people who they want to win, or for that matter, they vote for the person because they don't want somebody else to win. In the very specific case of the presidential election, though, it is Democratic dogma that Ralph Nader lost to Al Gore, despite the fact Al Gore couldn't win his own state, or that the number of Democrats that didn't vote for Al Gore in Florida, for example, or the number of black voters that were kept off the rolls. Like, But it doesn't really matter what the reality of it is. What matters is what the dogma is. And when these guys are crafting a voting rights law, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility at all that in 800 pages, many of these guys are lawyers, they jam in poison pills that adversely affect the groups that they don't like. In this very specific case, the Green Party or some other third party that is running in the race with them. I mean, do you think that's too cynical or do you think that's too on point?
Well, I think it depends on the person involved in crafting the legislation, because I think a lot of them are just ignorant, frankly. I mean, these politicians, a lot of them really don't know very much, and they don't even read the legislation. They have their aides do it. So I think some of them don't even know what the hell they're doing. But yes, I think some of them know exactly what they're doing. And, because we have, like here in New York, Governor Cuomo and the whole Democratic Party tripled the number of votes third parties need to stay on the ballot and triple the number of signatures we need to get back on the ballot. They did that on a budget bill that was under the cover of the coronavirus pandemic when, hardly anybody was paying attention. So that was very deliberate.
Exactly. And look at Jill Stein. I mean, look at what they did to her in 2016. They basically tried to blame her for Hillary Clinton losing that race. They even dragged her onto the media in order to kind of attack her for running in the first place. That's kind of what I'm getting at. That's why I don't think this is just, oh golly gee, we didn't realize that we were hurting third-party presidential candidates in this bill. Sorry. I don't buy that for a moment.
I think the biggest thing that could be done to open the elections to third parties, particularly on the left, is to have ranked choice voting for single seats like president and multi-seat ranked choice voting, which creates proportional representation for legislative bodies. Because most progressives, most people on the left in this country, they vote against the Republicans by voting for the centrist Democrats, because they're afraid if they vote for the Greens on the left, the Republicans will get elected. And that dynamic out of our plurality voting system has an enduring power you can trace back in presidential elections to the first third-party campaign in 1840, the Liberty Party against slavery. And third parties running for president have only got over 3% 3 times in 46 elections over 180 years. And even then, it was single digits and one time 17%, in any case, every time a distant third. So if we really wanted to open it up for third parties, there's actually a bill in Congress called the Fair Representation Act that would require ranked choice voting for Congress. And that's the kind of thing we need at the presidential level. There is legislation to get rid of the Electoral College, which is very biased toward the Republicans, but not to elect, and you replace that with a popular vote. What we need is a bill for a ranked choice popular vote for president. And then people could vote for the party they really want without worrying about helping the party that they're scared of. So that's, I think, the game changer when we get to politics. That is not in H.R. 1.
No, that's not in H.R. 1. And I don't think the Democratic Party want to do anything to take that. Meaning, because let's be very honest, a lot of the politics, and we need to take a break, but a lot of the politics in the country boils down to this notion of you're so terrified of the Republicans winning, you vote for any random Democrat. And if there was a third party choice that you could get, you have this esoteric other that's on your shoulder that says, if I vote for this person, and I think a lot of people may vote for this person, but not enough to win. And so it will be throwing my vote away. Hence, I must vote for this random Democrat. And ranked choice voting eliminates that. Because at that point, you vote for the person who you want. And if that person doesn't win, you vote for the next person in line that you want. Meaning you get to pick 2 choices, your best and your least. And in that very specific situation, you may have a situation where Jill Stein gets X number of votes, but Clinton gets X number, if that makes sense. Still wins, but gets X number. The point is, you don't lose just because you vote for the person that you want. Ranked choice voting is an excellent idea. In Maine, if I'm not mistaken, they implemented it through referendum, and the political parties tried to get rid of it. Because, again, part of the way that they get elected is by that pressure that if you don't vote for them, if you vote for a third party, a Republican is going to get in office. And the moment that you relieve that, well, you have a higher chance or a higher propensity for a third party to win. The voice that you guys were listening to was Howie Hawkins, co-founder of the Green Party of the United States, presidential nominee for the Green Party in 2020 election, gubernatorial nominee for the Green Party in New York in 2010, 2014, and 2018, as well as trade unionist, environmental activist, and retired Teamster. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Howie will be with us here in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we continue to be joined by Howie Hawkins, co-founder of the Green Party of the United States, presidential nominee for the Green Party in the 2020 election, gubernatorial nominee for the Green Party in New York in 2010, 2014, and 2018, as well as a trade unionist, environmental activist, and retired Teamster. You can follow Howie on Twitter at Howie Hawkins and learn more about the Green Party at gp.org. Howie, thank you again for sticking with us. I want to follow up with changing topics slightly. Last conversation we were having was the green perspective on HR1. I want to go to the green perspective in general. Again, thank you for being with us. I'll start with this. We could get into policies that the Greens advance across the board. I want to start with this, though. You're a retired Teamster. What do you think about the Democrats' working relationship with the working class over the last couple of decades? How that's changed? I'm guessing you think some things went wrong somewhere along the line. If so, where did that go wrong? What happened? What do you think about how the Democrats have worked with the working class and specifically with the union membership? What's your take, Howie?
Well, I think they take working class for granted because what are they going to do? Go to the Republicans? And actually, some have over the cultural issues as opposed to the economic class issues, where the Democrats, talk a good game, but they have not delivered. Think about, so there really hasn't been any substantial programs adopted to benefit working class people since Medicare and Medicaid in the mid-'60s. And then you have to go back to the New Deal. So I think the relationship has been, workers give the Democrats their votes, unions give the Democrats their money, and the Democrats say, thank you very much, and then take them for granted. Like the card check legislation, where you can form a union if majority of people at a work site, a bargaining unit, sign a card saying they want representation by the union. And that was legislation that Barack Obama promised in 2008 and again in 2012, and then in office did nothing to get it implemented. And that's sort of been the relationship.
Well, I try to tell people that just because a politician promises something in the primary, or for that matter, in the main election, it doesn't necessarily mean they stand for it. You kind of have to look at what the party has been doing and what that particular person has been doing. And, Joe Biden can say everything he wants about union membership. If he is not willing to go to the mat for it, it's just words. It's no different than his $15 an hour minimum wage thing. If you're not willing to go to the mat for it, if you're not willing to push for it, then you don't really believe it. How have we lost that thread, Howie? Because as you mentioned, there was a time where unions were working with, had a connection, let's say, with the political party or political edifice itself. How did that come apart? And how do we get that back together? Is it even possible to get back together? Because honestly, it doesn't necessarily seem like there's an inflection point where the public will and public intent matches the political space. It seems that those things are just in two different areas. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we did make advances, it was in the mid-'30s. There was the CIO was organizing industrial industries, and there was a lot of movement on the streets and movement by the people, and the government had to respond. They were worried about that. Same thing in the mid-'60s when we got Medicare, Medicaid, along with the civil rights and voting rights legislation, there was a massive disruptive civil rights movement. So instead of passively voting for the Democrats and if you're a union, giving them money, we need to be out there organizing and on the streets. And the strongest thing would be if they couldn't take our votes for granted, that we had a viable third party on the left representing working people. Now, the Green Party aspires to be that. The problem is what we talked about earlier is that plurality voting dynamic, which forces people on the left to vote for the center to stop the right.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. In my opinion, this is maybe a little bit more controversial, but I think if you make things as simple as left and right, and then you say approximately half the population is left, approximately half the population is right, particularly the voting population, then by definition, if you have two parties on the left, they're going to be stealing from each other's votes. They're going to be sapping each other's growth. I think that's hard to deny. If, on the other hand, it's not as simple as under plurality voting, maybe
you wouldn't split the left and center vote. Because the left
I hear you.
The center second, and the center can rank the left second.
I guess where I'm going with this is it doesn't need to be as simple as one dimension. It doesn't need to be as simple as the left versus the right on the single dimension of difference. Because frankly, the ways in which we could make America better, the ways in which we can improve things, for ourselves and around the world in terms of what we do overseas, those are many and diverse, and they cut across a lot of different lines. And so this is a deeper criticism, but maybe one way to follow up on this, how do you see the Green Party, 2020 presidential nominee for the Green Party, yourself speaking, how do you see the Green Party as meaningfully different than the Democrats at this point? What specific policies would you advocate that really cut against the grain of what the Democrats are doing? What do the Democrats get wrong in terms of their policies? Howie.
Well, on the economic class issues, we believe in an economic bill of rights. So a federal job guarantee, a guaranteed minimum income above poverty, Medicare for all, tuition-free public education from pre-K and child care through post-secondary college and trade schools, expanding public housing till everybody has access to affordable housing, and a secure retirement by increasing Social Security benefits. So right there, the economic issues. In terms of our military and foreign policy, we should stop being the world's military empire and start being its humanitarian superpower. So radically cut the military budget, bring our troops home, and then use that money to make friends instead of enemies and help the world deal with our crises, which I think are the two at the top of the list are the nuclear arms race and the climate crisis. So we call for a Green New Deal, in fact, a global Green New Deal. And that would be a program to get to 100% clean energy by 2030 and have emissions reduced to zero and then negative. Because right now, if 350 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere is the safety level that the climate scientist James Hansen and associates have suggested, we're at 415 now. So we not only have to stop emitting, we have to find ways to draw that carbon back out of the atmosphere by things like afforestation and rebuilding soils instead of having industrialized agriculture. So right there, that's domestic policy, foreign policy, and the environment. Big differences from anything we're getting from the Democrats. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took the new Green New Deal slogan and introduced a non-binding resolution into the House. Pelosi's never let them vote on it. And the resolution was watered down from the Green New Deal we've been talking about for a decade. For example, it eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. And it extended the deadline for zero emissions from 2030 to 2050. So we have fundamental differences with the Democrats and Republicans.
Well, it sounds like it, but I mean, here's the interesting thing. You spent maybe half of the time in your response there talking about environmental policies, but for the first half of your response, you were talking about a lot of other stuff. And when I think of the Green Party, when I've thought of it historically, I have thought of it as the environmentalist party. There's a little bit, I don't know if this makes sense, but there's a degree of cognitive dissonance that comes into my mind hearing you say this, because from the first half of what you were saying, you're representing what a lot of people on the left simply want. And again, I'm falling into that left-right dichotomy myself, but it's true. When you were talking about Medicare for all, more affordable public housing across the board for everybody, you're talking about a jobs guarantee, et cetera. Those are simply left-wing messages. Those aren't environmental messages. Does this make sense? And is there a sort of a branding thing at a high level that you see potentially playing a role here, posing a problem? Howie?
Well, any name you use is going to have limitations in terms of its branding. I mean, green, in a way, is accidental. You know, when the German Greens rose, they were filling a niche that none of the parties there filled, dealing with the environment and the arms race and the new social movements coming out of the 1960s around feminism and gay liberation. So in Germany, they use colors. So, you know, green symbolized the environment. So that's what they chose. And because they were so successful, a lot of us around the world looking for a new politics because the parties we had weren't dealing with our problems, we picked up green. So, yeah, green is seen as a metaphor for the environment. But as soon as you start talking to us, you find out we have what we call 4 pillars of green politics: social justice, nonviolence, grassroots democracy, and ecology. So it's more than just the environment.
Let me ask you this, just before we close. How can the Greens, I don't know, expand? Because like Shane, the point that Shane made, there are a lot of lefties who believe in the green policies. And it's not a situation where those people feel like they have any kind of credible representation. So there was a belief that when Hillary ran, that the Greens would be able to do something, like, you know, hit the 5% threshold or something to that effect. And even in that race where all of those people, the overwhelming majority of the public, wanted something different, they still ended up going, you know, Stein still wasn't able to get the 5%, nor was the Libertarian candidate. How can the Greens, on some level, change? And how can they be, I don't know, be acknowledged, be a force in the political space, even if that force is just enough to make the other party win where they have to respect you? How do you guys change or transform? And what would you advise the Green Party to do if it was entirely up to you? If you were God King Howie Hawkins, how would you make that change for the Greens to expand in the political electorate in the United States?
Well, we've elected hundreds of people to local office over the years, 1,200 elections we've won. We have over 100 in office right now. We can expand that into the thousands because in local races, that lesser evil dynamic doesn't play such a big role. And you can talk to all the voters without a lot of money by knocking on doors. So that's where we can build a political base and from there get to state legislatures in the House. The other thing we can do is push ranked choice voting, which I think is an idea whose time has come. It's now in 39 cities. It just got passed in Burlington, Vermont last week. It got passed in 6 more cities in the November election. It's now in 2 states, both Maine and Alaska. And there are campaigns, strong campaigns in about 20 states now to bring this to cities, counties, and state legislatures. So I think those are the 2 paths. You know, build from below, run for local office, build up a political base, and push for ranked choice voting. I think that's how we establish a foothold in the American political system.
Yeah, ranked choice will be a weapon. And it will be a weapon for the American public, honestly. That esoteric other is horrible aspect of our politics. So, Howie, thank you for joining us. Howie Hawkins, co-founder of the Green Party of the United States, presidential nominee for the Green Party in the 2020 election, gubernatorial nominee for the Green Party in New York in 2010, 2014, and 2018, as well as a trade unionist, environmental activist, retired Teamster. Also, you can follow Howie on Twitter at Howie Hawkins and learn more about the Green Party at gp.org. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment for the wrap.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and it is the wrap for today's show. That means we're wrapping today's show up in a pretty little bow tie. We're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Anything we talked about today you want to bring up, now's the time. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on? Tarif, I hear some feedback there. I don't know if you're with us, Tarif. Are you there? All right. I cannot make anything out. I'm sorry, Tarif. We've got to move on. Appreciate the call. Please call back in some other time. Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on. What's going on?
Hey guys, I was trying to get in a little bit earlier so I could. I actually had a question for Howie. I would like to ask him. Many of us agree with most of the social policies that we saw earlier. I mean, back in the day or whatever, were in response to great pressure from the American public taking to the street. And so, my question to him would have been, what strategies the Green Party or any third parties, or just even him himself, what strategy would he like to see employed, or would he advise to stir the American, to drive massive action in the streets by the American public? Does that make sense? Like, what could we do? Or what strategies would the third party, would the Green Party have for trying to drive street action at the street level from the American populace? Because clearly, we're not going to get anything until we do. There's just no we can have these like great conversations, which at this point are just becoming reruns on all fronts for independence and progressive voices. They're just becoming reruns because we're all asking the same questions. But what it basically boils down to is that we're begging and hoping, and we saw with Obama, change doesn't come from hope. You know what I'm saying? It only comes from street action. And if we are paying attention, one would have to recognize and connect the dots that we're having a crackdown, massive censorship. You see that they're putting up barriers around the Capitol, and more will follow in Washington to protect them from us. And then they're passing domestic terrorism laws, or they want to protect them from us. And then they're doing what we would look at as, voters' rights, when really it's just to protect themselves politically from third-party interests and whoever knows God what else that's inside of that massive bill. So it seems to me that what we're seeing is they are responding out of fear to the growing pains of the public. They're just not responding in a way that would benefit us. They're just responding in a way to protect themselves. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, Brave. Good point, man. It's always aggravating. Look, man, I get your aggravation, man. I feel you. It's they take actions where it's like we can do two things. We can either put more people in prison, or we can deal with the economic needs of those people to ensure they stay out of prison. Well, we can't deal with the latter because, we don't want to get attacked politically, so we got to put more people in prison. Meaning we're okay with being harsh and hard and unempathetic. But the other part, not so much, despite the fact that, like Howie was saying, food for bombs, or food instead of dropping bombs, will get you just as far, if not farther, than what those bombs would. But one is off the table as a conversation. Meaning it's off the table to provide Medicare for all. It's off the table to ensure that people have health care. It's off the table to ensure people who go to jail get their voting rights back, where apparently it's not. But even with that, you have to have this kind of weird thing where you lose out on your ability to get third parties elected by improving the lot for felons. Those things shouldn't be at odds, and yet they are. And we get put into these weird complications constantly. Brave. I agree with you, man. You're absolutely right. Most of the time you are. Tarif, what's going on, man? You're back.
Hello? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
All right, yeah, I was on my Bluetooth and I pressed the wrong button. But anyway, so forced to vote on 15. We got to force to vote on Medicare for all. I was just thinking over the weekend, we got all this going on in the world. We got all the distractions like Meghan Markle and all that, which is a distraction. We got India passing laws against Facebook and Twitter. That's the end of U.S. soft power dealing with social media. It's over. They're going to have to depend on their hard power. and especially with the advancement of the Chinese in the scientific sector, and Russians dealing with their drone technologies to limit drones. The United States hard power is going to be declining too in the future. I was so much putting my chips on Trump supporting drone and science and everybody, and also declassifying those documents dealing with JFK, that we lost focus. That we do know. I think people in the United States looking for saviors that's on the left and right, instead of just focusing on themselves and making demands like we should be doing to push these politicians in the way that we want them to go, to end homelessness and end these wars. We're looking for these like Trump or Bernie Sanders to save us. We can't be worrying about that too much. We have to start like protesting the wise way, non-violent way, peaceful way to move forward. If not, things will get worse and worse and worse, and we're going to constantly divide and divide and divide. So,
Tarif, quick question, and I should have asked Brave this too. Do peaceful protests get ignored? And if they get ignored, do they have value? I'm just asking. Now, that's a dark question, and I know that's a dark question. When Martin Luther King had the sit-ins, just to make a point real quick, I know Martin Luther King seemed peaceful, but I'm telling you, if you had an African American in the 60s that decided to sit in to a restaurant, that's considered violence. Now, whether it's violence or not, in the reality, clearly it's not. From the standpoint of the conceptual space of the whites that were in that place, and because of the laws, that person is breaking the law. Meaning they went to the point of breaking the law to put that stuff on notice, the word is escaping me, but basically to be provocative in a way that they were pushed back against the system in a way that was breaching the law, in a way that the society probably considered violent. Does peaceful protests work? And did they work over the summer? And Shane, you can answer that too.
Do peaceful protests work, man? I don't even know about protests in the U.S. in general. What's stopping the U.S. from having a massive yellow vest style movement? But if you look at France, yellow vest protests have been massive. But what has the response been? I don't know if protests work that well at all.
Well, I can give you the response in France.
Between me.
Well, I can give you the response in France. I mean, Macron was throwing all sorts of goodies over the side, trying to get and lessen the number of people. 70% of the public in France backed the yellow vest movement at one point. And yeah, Macron started to basically say, hey, we'll give this, this, and this. If you remember, Macron was trying to run a higher deficit than the European Union allowed. The European Union gave him the provision to allow him to run that deficit because he was so terrified that the Yellow Vest movement was going to continue and expand. They did get gains. Why didn't we get gains in the U.S. for the Black Lives Matter protests after Floyd? That's my question.
Arguably you did. Arguably you had, but it was a relatively limited protest in terms of its explicitly stated intent. You did have police departments across the country changing their laws to prevent chokeholds. You sort of like point-wise responses to a lot of the specific grievances that people had. Now, what we were talking about on the show in the previous incarnation, as well as this incarnation of Fault Lines, is underlying the protest are much wider economic grievances and deeper problems that people want solved. And those don't get solved. But I guess I bring up France. I see some movement there, but I don't see all that much. And France is among countries in the world, I would argue, the most protest friendly. So, just historically, this is like a meme almost at this point that they're the country that protests.
Yeah, they like put the cows out in the streets. Yeah, they're great.
Yes, I want to come back to. It's just interesting to note the through line between what Brave and Tarif were saying, both calling for widespread action on the streets in America, and Brave, you were talking about these conversations or repeats. I hear you, man. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do either. I see these deeper problems, and I do not know how to solve them. And so all that I can do is try to have interesting and illuminating conversations on this show while I think about it, while we work our way closer, slowly, hopefully, and hopefully more quickly to a solution. But just being straightforward with you, I hear you. I do not know what to do about it. Trying to be as blunt as I can.
And by the way, Occupy Wall Street.
Don't.
Occupy Wall Street. The 99%. How long did those go? Disorganized, yeah. But it was a lot of people. It was massive people. We are the 99%. If nothing else, they got that across. It just seems like at a certain point, those things get ignored. And you have to wonder, what comes after the peaceful protest. And look, whether you think that's positive.
Occupy Wall Street.
Say that one more time.
We've had this argument before. We've had this argument before, but what actually came out of Occupy Wall Street?
Well, that's kind of the point I'm getting at.
Substantive changes.
Right. That's kind of the point I'm getting at. I mean, and Brave's point, they responded to Occupy Wall Street with, what is the thing? The defense, what is it that Obama signed? The NDAA, the Non-Defense Authorization Act, the Defense Authorization Act. But basically saying that putting troops on U.S. soil, if there's an insurgency or something like that, locking up American citizens. Chris Hedges talks about this, where he takes the U.S. government to court. The government basically said, he comes away with the assessment that the government was already using the provision, despite the fact that the judge was like, yeah, you can't do this. And so, so there were responses to it. Unfortunately, it just weren't the responses that we wanted. It wasn't, hey, let's deal with the economic woes of the country. It was more so, hey, let's make provisions just in case that country pops off again in another Occupy Wall Street, that we could put more people in prison and in black sites. So,
here's one response to Tarif too. Though you're talking about not looking for saviors, pushing directly for what you want in protests in the street. The thing is, I don't see how you get there in the long run. I don't see how you get your policies put into action unless you manage to find or create some leaders, either who directly represent your opinions by getting elected into Congress, or who can serve as the leadership for a movement that would reform our government and make things better. Ultimately, the process works by creating people who can stand at the head of it and get things done. I don't see how you get around that. And I'm not trying to push too substantially, just push too hard against, your comments about getting people out into the streets in general. I think if that works, we should go for it. But the general air these days is a bit of cynicism, as you can all tell. But thank you, everybody, for listening. We're closing the show out today, folks. I want to thank Jamarl, my co-host, all of our guests, all of our callers, producer Mary T. And we will be back tomorrow, folks. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you on the other side.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record book. I gotta be honest, I felt like I was dragging ass today. I'm not quite sure why. I kept screwing up Howie's gubernatorial for whatever particular reason. I couldn't get that word out. Very strange. The interviews were okay. Some I like more than others, but that was, I think, more of a factor of me. For example, the conversation with, let me see. For some reason, I thought the conversation with Howie could have went better. Yeah, but not quite sure why yet. I need to rethink it. Sharma is always cool. He's always affable. I gotta be honest. I thought Sharm was gonna push more into the Modi camp. I thought Sharm was gonna be like, yeah, Modi is totally right for kicking those, putting those people in prison or threatening to put those people in jail. He was actually quite sane and reasonable, at least from my standpoint. And his assessment is like, yeah, I can't get behind Modi on locking up these guys who are working at the various companies. By the same token, your country did the exact same thing when it had the protests on the Capitol. So how are you guys bitching at us about it? It's a fair point. I said, thinking to myself, yeah, that's a fair point. That's a very fair point. Peter Oliver is always affable. The Tory lead and oppose. We should have talked about that more, because that's a big fucking deal. If you think about what Jeremy Corbyn, what happened in all of that, meaning they basically severed off their left wing. They put a knife in their left wing. And a guy who was monstrously popular, they basically, not only did they get rid of him as leader of the opposition, but after getting rid of him as leader of the opposition, they continued to attack him with spurless claims of anti-Semitism to the point where they tried to kick him out the party. Why would anybody on the left stay with Labor after that? Why would anybody on the left stay with Labor? It would be like if Democrats not only beat Sanders, but also found a way to get Sanders kicked out of Congress or something. This is astonishing. Yes, he's still in Parliament. Yes, he's still in Labor. But no, he's not in the whip position. I'm just making the point that the attacks on the left in the UK probably have a lot to do with the failure of the left in the UK, juxtaposed against how pointless Keir Starmer is. I mean, at the point where you see Corbyn, even if you don't necessarily think Corbyn has the physical presence in order to make it work, because I didn't think he physically stood up well against Boris Johnson. Whereas Theresa May is more of a slower figure, let's put it that way. Boris Johnson is a large, vigorous man who has no issue with lying, no issue with being disingenuous, none of that stuff to push forward his political agenda. He is very good at not answering questions. He's very good at dodging various issues. And honestly, depending upon the lesson or the message that he can get on, you could find yourself in trouble trying to deal with him. Corbyn did not handle him all that well. And in working with the other parties, Corbyn's problem was that he deviated from the referendum. It's twofold. One, I don't think he matched up well with Boris, but he definitely didn't match up well at the point where he basically abandoned the referendum. They had a weird policy that didn't make sense, and they lost as a result of it. The first one, Peter Oliver, the Iranian one, that one is interesting to me, and I'm the one who dragged that one in, because I thought that one was good news or interesting news. Even though I wasn't quite sure how can I say this? It's like there's some things that are news stories, where it's like, all right, here's a news story, that's up. There are other things where there are debates, where it's like, all right, I'm going to have a fight over XYZ. This was more of a news story. And it was more of, this is what's taking place in Iran, this is what's taking place in Britain. These guys are at these kind of loggerheads over this issue. Is it, or does it have something to do with the cash? Yay or nay? Was she there for the very specific interests of visiting family or some with Reuters? Or are they right on some level that she was working in the capacity of, I don't know, the UK government or something? Considering the leaks that came out from Reuters and the BBC, it gave me pause about wondering whether or not her affiliation at the various places or her affiliation of Reuters had anything to do with these guys arresting her. And so I was curious about Oliver's point of view and curious about the news that was taking place in the UK on her case. Oliver knew a lot about it, so I knew a ton about it. So in that sense, it was good. I don't know. It's fault lines. And so in my head, I'm looking, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's like, there's some people we bring on, or there's some shows where it's like high energy, high impact. And some of the stuff is from self. And so it's not necessarily an appraisal of what took place, because there's no way for me to know from the external side what took place. I can only know my part. But I thought Oliver's segment was good. I thought Sharma's segment was good. I thought Howie's wasn't horrible, but I thought Howie's could be better, but that's on me. And it has everything to do with the way the questions we hit him with. But I didn't think it was a horrible show overall. Just for some reason I felt like I was dragging ass. Nevertheless, we will be back with the different fault lines tomorrow. I may have a few shows today. Today is my mom's birthday. And my mom is at the house today. She came to spend the day. And so I may be there with her, hanging out. And if not, you guys will see me later on today. But either way, we'll see. I think she's leaving today, so either way, you probably will see me. So I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Oh, wow. I have the comments. Usually there are no comments. All right, let's see what the comments are. The $15 thing, by the way, is a big deal. Very big deal. Now, when I made the point about the force to vote thing being a vanity project, I didn't mean that in the sense of it's being pointless or worthless. I meant it more so in the sense that the point of it wasn't to get the Medicare for all. The point of it was ancillary items associated with Medicare for all that should have been fought for. Look, personally, I think you should take every opportunity to try to assert the leverage that you have at your disposal, unless there's some big reason not to do it. I didn't like the animosity that started with the force to vote stuff. I hated that. And I thought that stuff was toxic. By the same token, I thought it was right to do. And again, I've made multiple arguments why I thought it was right to do. And in the same way, I think it's right to do here. In fact, I am more emphatic that it is right to do here, because the $15 an hour minimum wage thing is something Biden said he was going to back. It is something he pushed for as a candidate. It is something that I think he would have a much harder time coming out to repudiate as opposed to getting on the bandwagon to back it. And so whether he does it or not is less relevant than whether you force him to make a choice. The forcing him to make a choice, the forcing him to show that he has agency to go one way or the other, and honestly forcing him to basically put a knife in his campaign chances going for the elections coming up in a couple of years by repudiating what he told the American public he was going to do. That's the point. My point is you have a much better chance of getting something like this passed when the president spent the entire election screaming open mouth about how he was going to back it. So yeah, you should force the vote. Clearly, you should force the vote in this situation. And yeah, it's a direct tally, meaning it is directly going to trying to get this passed. Whereas the other one was more so ancillary. There were going to be other downhill effects. It wasn't going to be ever, none of that was ever going to get Medicare for all passed. The point wasn't to get it passed, though. The point was to get people on the record. And the point was to get people familiar with using leverage in and of itself in a political space to get what they want, as opposed to just typically begging politicians to get this or that. No, this is where you leave blood and teeth on the field in order to get passed, because this is a doubling of the minimum wage, and this is a generational thing that, yeah, the left should do. Peter version 1, what if no one voted? How would politicians react? So that's the interesting thing. If 15 million people left the Democratic Party, you can get change. You can get change. Now, the catch for that is kind of the conversation we had with Howie, where people get freaked out by the whole thing. Oh, if I don't vote for the Democrat, this Republican will win. Look, there's some times where the Republican needs to win in order for the Democratic Party to get its head right. And Howie is right also. A strong third party that could actually put up a contest or a chance forces the other party to change to accommodate. The catch is there are no third parties. And so you're basically stuck with the Democrat or Republican. And by not having anything on the sides, not having this kind of parliamentary system, you're basically stuck with one or the other. Or you're stuck with saying, I'm willing for that guy to lose, if it means getting across of how serious I am. I didn't vote for Biden. I didn't vote for Clinton. I wasn't going to vote for neither because I didn't trust neither. And honestly, my beliefs about Biden are just being verified. No, it really does boil down to not voting is a weapon. It's not a great one, but it is one. And yeah, you get millions of people who leave the party and you get a change in the party, either for the betterment or to the detriment. Meaning either the party explodes or that thing has to change. And honestly, the change can come after the explosion. I don't care which one. I just know the way the party is structured now, nothing can get accomplished. We don't even know if the House, who originally put in the $15, is going to stand by the $15 as it goes to the Senate. We don't even know that. And if nothing else, the House should not take that 15 out. The House should send that bill back exactly the way it is and make Joe Manchin or whatever other Democrats that in the Senate kill the COVID stimulus bill because they don't want to back up the $15 an hour that the president said he was going to do. That's what the House should do. It is on them at this point. Because after all, the House only did what the president wanted. The Senate is the one that took the 15 out. Make the argument and own it. Northern Lights, I have no idea how you put this guy here, but that is so badass. G5, thank you, G5. I appreciate it, guys. Leave comments. Trudy, Steve Ratner on Monday, Monday Journal, pushing for 15 is amazing. Oh, Steve Ratner, or Morning Joe, pushing for 15. Look, at the point where Joe Biden said it as a candidate, at the point where he fought Trump on it on the debate stage, at the point where he becomes president and he says, I spoke to my economic advisors, we need to do this. How do you back away from that? And what does the American public think when you do? Think about what I'm asking. Am I being unfair? I'm not the one who said $15 an hour. Joe Biden said that. I'm not saying that he needs to do Medicare for all because he said it, because he never said that. He said a public option, so that's the thing that I hit Joe Biden on. I think his plan is too small, yes. By the same token, from this American context, they would consider it as revolutionary because it's the most that anybody has ever done in the course of X number of decades. The catch here is, though, it's not being done. And that's the problem. The $15 an hour is a big deal. The $2,000 is a big deal. The fact that you didn't deliver on either of those is a big deal. And it's one that you will be dealing with when you get to the midterms. And the argument is they said this and they didn't do it. They said they were going to do this and they didn't do it. They claim they were going to give a $15 an hour minimum wage. Did you get it? They claim you were going to get $2,000 in checks. Did you get it? They claimed you might even get $1,400 in checks. Did you get it? And for 17 million Americans who those checks have been ripped away from because of Joe Biden's decided to negotiate with themselves, or Democrats decided to negotiate with themselves, that line of argument is also going to be true. It's not that there aren't good things in the bill. The point is that the things that were supposed to be there that the president promised are missing. And it's not a situation where the president doesn't have power to deliver. He just doesn't have the will, the temperament, or for that matter, even the political instinct. I would even go so far as to say even the want to deliver. Like, share, and subscribe.